Beneath the sweltering Florida sun, the massive cargo ship Horizon Sun was about to become ground zero for a confrontation the hijackers never saw coming. When a ruthless gang set its sights on the ship's valuable container load, they believed they'd run into minimal resistance. What they didn't realize was that one of those unassuming containers held a former Force Recon Marine sniper, an off-grid passenger returning home with a skill set honed in the world's deadliest combat zones. The ocean breeze rippled across rows of steel crates as the Horizon Sun powered through calm waters. Most of the crew expected an uneventful voyage, a routine trip off the Florida coast. Yet beneath the routine hum of the engines, a silent current of tension crackled on deck. Strange radio chatter, unfamiliar faces in the harbor, and whispers of a high-stakes smuggling operation hinted that trouble was closing in. No one, not even the most vigilant officer, could have foreseen just how explosive this night would become, nor the single stowaway who would tip the balance. What began as a stealthy attempt to slip back into the country would unravel a far-reaching criminal enterprise, forcing a battle that would test one man's lethal expertise and change every life aboard forever. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. High over the moonlit waters off the Florida Straits, a warm breeze skimmed the dark, rolling surface of the sea. The cargo vessel SS Horizon Sun plowed steadily west, its deck lights illuminating only the faintest outlines of stacked shipping containers. In one of those containers, hidden behind rows of steel crates, sat Travis Caldwell. He was a man who moved through the world now like a ghost, intentionally off-grid. Once upon a time, he'd been a Force Recon Marine, a sniper with countless missions under his belt. Now, his broad shoulders and angular features, etched by years of conflict, remained in the shadows. There was no bed in the container, just a narrow sleeping pad he'd rolled out in the corner. The crisp smell of salt air and steel surrounded him. Travis hadn't planned on traveling home this way inside a container bound for a port in Florida, but after running into a series of bureaucratic nightmares and personal complications, it was the only sure method of discreet return. Hopping a cargo vessel in the Bahamas and stowing away inside a container arranged by an old friend meant nobody would have a paper trail of him re-entering the States. The plan had seemed almost comical at first, but Travis needed anonymity more than ever. He wanted to avoid the prying eyes of old enemies and the curious gaze of agencies that might want to leverage his skill set for questionable favors. He sat in the dim cargo hold, listening to the rhythmic drone of the ship's engines through the steel walls. With no windows, he measured time by the hum of machinery and the occasional faint voices of deckhands drifting through metal vents. Now and then he'd slip out under the cover of darkness to stretch his legs, using a tiny crack near the container's door to confirm the coast was clear before emerging. Tonight, he was waiting patiently for land to appear on the horizon. Everything changed when, in the hush of late-night monotony, he heard distinct footfalls approaching, multiple sets of boots, the clanking of rifles and gear. He froze. This wasn't the typical shuffle of the Horizon Sun's crew, nor the halting steps of a safety patrol. There was urgency and malice in the stride. He crept to the door, kneeling down to peer through a narrow slit between container doors. In the faint glow of deck lights, Travis saw half a dozen figures in dark clothing moving across the ship's deck, weapons at the ready. They weren't wearing typical security or Coast Guard gear. These were men armed with submachine guns and short-barreled rifles, and they moved with a sense of ownership, scanning corners and shouting to each other in hushed tones. Their voices carried even above the ocean wind. "Clear over here," one of them hissed. Travis counted them, 7 hostiles. He recognized a disciplined formation, but not the crisp precision of a military squad. These men were practiced, sure, yet ragged around the edges. Likely smugglers or pirates who had come to seize control of the vessel. If they'd boarded in the dead of night, they'd done it swiftly and quietly. He carefully clicked the safety off his sidearm, a heavily modified M1911 he'd managed to bring along. He had more weapons, a disassembled AR-15 stashed in the crate behind him, but retrieving it in the cramped container would be noisy. For the moment, all he had was the pistol. Yet Travis felt no fear. Instead, adrenaline seeped in, and with it a sense of absolute focus. For years, he'd lived in this headspace. Silently, he pressed an ear to the container's door to hear the intruders as they continued deeper into the cargo deck. A muffled scuffle erupted from beyond, followed by distressed shouts in Spanish. Then the sharp rapport of gunfire cut through the night. The unsuspecting crew must have found themselves pinned, unarmed, or outgunned. The normal shipping crew on a commercial cargo vessel had minimal defenses, if any. Travis clenched his jaw. He knew on principle it might be wise to remain out of sight. He wasn't even supposed to be on this ship. Yet there was a moral line he couldn't ignore. People were in danger, and he had the means and the skill to intervene. But he also suspected these attackers weren't run-of-the-mill pirates. Their approach was too methodical. They likely had inside information about the cargo manifests. They wanted something specific. The container door was locked from the outside but rigged by Travis so he could unhook it. He hesitated. The corridor outside might still be crawling with intruders. Then he remembered how a single moment's hesitation had cost a friend his life years before in Afghanistan. Travis exhaled slowly and flicked open the container's heavy steel latch from within. The door creaked. He waited a heartbeat. No immediate shouts of alarm. He slipped through the narrow opening and stepped onto the cargo deck. The acrid smell of smoke and the tang of fresh gunpowder stung the air. Overhead, the moon cast a dim silver glow. Row upon row of containers lay before him like a labyrinth, illuminated by the scattered deck lights. He pressed his body against the side of his container, hearing more sporadic bursts of gunfire. Near the fore of the ship, he caught a glimpse of muzzle flashes. He scanned the dark shape of a tall crane that rose overhead, part of the ship's loading system. No sign of a sniper's nest. Good. That meant these hijackers probably had no overhead coverage. Travis crouched, listening to the sharp crackle of handheld radios. Their voices, though hushed, carried orders. Comprueba los camarotes. Check the cabins. Buscar al capitán de rápido. Find the captain fast. They wanted the captain. They probably needed him for access to sensitive areas or to ensure the ship wouldn't be scuttled. Travis's mind churned rapidly, strategizing. If he let them get total control, the entire crew might be hostages. He inched forward, hugging the shadows. Near a large coil of rope, he found the first body, a deckhand, bleeding badly from a gunshot wound to the chest. Travis checked for a pulse. Weak but present. The man's eyelids fluttered, but he seemed semi-conscious. Travis quickly pressed a gloved hand over the wound, stanching the bleeding. "Stay with me," he whispered. The deckhand's lips moved, forming silent words. Then a flicker of terror crossed his eyes, focusing behind Travis. Instinct took over. Travis whirled. A hijacker emerged from behind a ventilation unit, submachine gun raised. Adrenaline sharpened Travis's reflexes. He fired 2 quick rounds from his pistol, hitting the man's center mass. The hijacker collapsed with a choked gasp, weapon clattering on the steel. For a moment, Travis felt the shock wave of what he'd done. He'd avoided lethal conflict since leaving the Marines, but now it had found him. The deckhand breathed weakly. Travis realized he couldn't stay here and administer help. Not yet. He was one man. The crew likely needed him to neutralize the threat. He pulled the deckhand behind a stack of pallets to hide him from immediate view. "Don't move," Travis urged gently, though he knew that man wouldn't be going anywhere. Then Travis pressed forward. Gunfire erupted again, more intense this time. It was coming from the port side where the ship's bridge rose above the main deck. Travis slid behind containers, stepping carefully over cables and hoses. Another hijacker's voice rose in an angry shout. Travis risked a glance around the corner. He spotted 2 men pushing a ship's officer to his knees against a bulkhead. "No," the officer cried in accented English, arms raised. One hijacker brandished a handgun, snarling threats in Spanish. The other swung a short rifle menacingly. Travis couldn't see their faces clearly under their black knit caps, but the tension in their body language was obvious. They wanted that officer's compliance now. Travis could almost taste the electricity in the air. He had to time this perfectly. From experience, he knew that to rescue a hostage from 2 armed men required precise shooting, or they'd just execute him in reflex. He estimated the distance, about 20 yards. The pistol was accurate in skilled hands at this range, but any movement from the hijackers could spoil his shot. One hijacker pressed the muzzle of his rifle against the officer's head. Travis exhaled, leveling his pistol. In the hush that followed, the other man turned his head. It was the fraction of a second Travis needed. Two thunderous cracks. The man with the rifle jerked backward, struck in the upper chest. The second hijacker whipped around, trying to fire at the muzzle flashes, but Travis squeezed off another 2 rounds, dropping him. The officer sprang away, heart pounding, wide-eyed. He stared at Travis in shock. A swirl of conflicting emotions crossed his face: terror, relief, confusion. Travis motioned for him to stay low. "Are there more of them on the bridge?" Travis demanded, voice low. "Yes," the officer said in a trembling voice. "They have the captain, first mate, and a few others at gunpoint." Travis nodded. He handed the officer the hijacker's fallen rifle. "Can you use this?" The officer looked uncertain, but he clutched the weapon with shaking hands. I had some basic training. We have drills for piracy, but it's not meant to be like this." Travis eyed him. "Stay quiet. If anyone comes around that corner you don't know, you shoot. That's it." He slipped away before the officer could argue. Travis had to move quickly, eliminate the threat on the bridge, and free the rest of the crew if they were still alive. Adrenaline laced his veins as he snuck deeper into the ship. Rounding a heavy steel door that led to an interior corridor, Travis halted. Overhead fluorescent lights flickered, revealing scuff marks, bullet holes, and droplets of blood along the walls. The corridor led toward a staircase that climbed to the next level, presumably where the bridge was located. Travis heard muffled commands from above, men rummaging, searching rooms, dragging hostages. A clank of metal indicated someone had forcibly opened a locked door. He holstered his pistol and, while crouched on the metal steps, reassembled his AR-15. He'd quietly retrieved it from his shipping container earlier that night in anticipation of bigger trouble. The upper receiver attached with a snug click, the bolt slid home, and he inserted a magazine. With a practiced motion, he chambered a round, then flicked the safety to fire. The weapon felt natural in his hands, an extension of himself. He climbed the steps silently, pressing close to the wall. On the landing above, a single overhead light swayed with the ship's motion. Travis heard men speaking fast Spanish. Their words were muffled but urgent. He heard references to the cargo hold, specific container numbers, and a repeated phrase, Los Barracudas, which made Travis's gut clench. He recognized that name as a notorious smuggling gang operating out of the Florida coast. They must have arranged the hijacking, possibly to intercept high-value contraband or something they believed was on board. The presence of so many armed men proved they weren't messing around. But they had no idea a Force Recon sniper was among their cargo. At the top of the stairwell, Travis paused. He didn't see immediate movement, but the corridor branched in 2 directions. A sudden outburst of cursing echoed from the left. That was probably where the captain and crew were being held. Travis leaned out, rifle raised, and sighted down the hallway. He spotted 2 hijackers at the far end, backs turned, rifles in hand, guarding a closed door. The men looked tense. Travis guessed the captain and possibly other officers were locked in that room. He'd have to move quickly or risk them raising an alarm. Slowly, carefully, Travis advanced in a low crouch. Every footstep was measured, each breath quiet. Just as he was within shooting range, one hijacker turned his head, eyes widening in shock. Travis fired a short, controlled burst. The near guard crumpled. The second guard cried out, firing wildly down the corridor. Rounds singed past, ricocheting off the walls. Travis dove prone. He squeezed the trigger, sending 2 well-aimed shots that caught the guard mid-torso. His body slammed against the wall, leaving a smear of blood as he slid to the floor. Travis froze, listening. If others were nearby, the gunshots would bring them running. Sure enough, from behind a door at the corridor's midpoint, angry shouts rose. He dashed to the closed door at the end where the guards had been standing. Locked. He battered the buttstock of his rifle against the handle. On the second strike, the flimsy lock gave way. The door swung open to reveal the captain, first mate, and 3 crew members all crouched in a cramped office area, hands tied. They blinked in disbelief at the sight of Travis with a rifle. "Anyone hurt?" Travis asked, voice low. The captain shook his head. "No, but they killed 2 men already." They demanded we give them the route to the vault cargo. We told them there's nothing special on board, but they wouldn't listen. Travis motioned the first mate forward to help him untie the others. Listen carefully. There are more armed men on the ship. I'm going to do my best to clear them out. You all need to secure yourselves somewhere safe. If you have an emergency kit or a panic room, use it. If not, barricade yourselves in here. The captain grimaced. We tried calling the Coast Guard, but they jammed our comms. We got out half a mayday, but I'm not sure if it was received. I'll handle it, Travis said. Lock this door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or the Coast Guard. His face was calm, like a man trained for exactly this scenario. The captain seemed at a loss for words, finally nodding. Thank you, he whispered. Travis left them and stepped back into the corridor. He could hear hurried footsteps from behind the mid-corridor door. Shadows shifted under the gap. More hijackers, likely. If he was caught in this hallway, he'd have no cover. He needed to force them into a less advantageous position. He moved swiftly toward the stairs. Just as his boot touched the top step, the door behind him swung open. Travis glanced over his shoulder to see 3 men with rifles pouring out of the room. Their eyes fixated on him, weapons raised. Instinct fired in Travis's muscles. He spun, diving into a crouch, AR muzzle spitting flames. The corridor lit with muzzle flashes, thunder bouncing off the walls. One hijacker dropped, the second jerked backward, wounded. The third, a tall man with a bushy beard, managed to fire a single shot that whizzed past Travis's ear. Travis fired again, 2 quick rounds, and the bearded man collapsed. Silence fell, except for the metallic ring in Travis's ears. He inhaled, chest tight, scanning the area. Bodies lay motionless. No more movement. A knot of anxiety twisted in Travis's gut. This was getting ugly and fast. He hoped there weren't more of them, but experience said otherwise. A well-organized hijacking crew often came in squads. They definitely realized they were dealing with a skilled opponent. He had to maintain the element of surprise as long as possible, keep them off balance, pick them off in small groups. That was the essence of force multiplication, exactly what they taught him in Recon. As he returned to the main deck, he saw motion near the cargo hold entrance. A shadow flitted between containers, heading for the starboard side. Then came the thunder of more gunshots. Travis ducked behind a vent. He peered around. Through the gloom, he spotted a gangly figure brandishing a rifle at the container rows, apparently searching. Another figure joined him, exchanging frantic words in Spanish. Something about the crazy ghost on board, and we lost contact with the others. Travis bit back a grim smile. Let them fear the ghost. A hiss of static cut in over their radio. ¿Qué demonios está pasando? A voice demanded. What the hell is going on? Nos están matando uno por uno, came the rattled reply. He's picking us off one by one. Travis aimed carefully. A single shot popped from his AR, striking the nearest man. The other spun, returned fire. Bullets pinged off the steel. Travis ducked, slithered around a container, and popped up on the other side. Another well-aimed burst. The second man tumbled backward. Smoke drifted in the moonlight. The old Marine side of him felt a rush of grim satisfaction. But Travis knew from experience that fights like this could turn in an instant. He had to maintain absolute vigilance. The entire ship had become a war zone. While most of the hijackers were presumably on the main deck or in the superstructure, there could be more lurking anywhere. He checked the magazine in his AR, half spent. He patted his belt for spare ammo. He had enough to finish the job if he was careful. He moved swiftly amid the containers, hugging corners, scanning overhead for vantage points. The hush of the ocean wind seemed to intensify the pounding of his heart. Suddenly, he caught movement near the bow beyond a cluster of crates. Muffled voices, the shuffle of feet. He pressed forward, steps as silent as possible. When he peered around a towering crate, his blood chilled. A knot of 3 hijackers stood around a kneeling hostage, another crewman, writhing with terror. This time, the hijackers were on high alert, scanning the darkness with wide eyes. One of them, a thick-set man with a shaved head, pressed his pistol to the hostage's temple. "Sal lo mato," he barked. "Come out or I'll kill him." Travis clenched his jaw. The hostage, trembling, locked eyes with him from a distance, though Travis was hidden in shadows. The big hijacker repeated his threat, stepping around to get a better vantage. The other 2 men swung their rifles in a slow sweep. They had the advantage of a human shield and they knew Travis was near. Any wrong move from Travis and the crewman would die. But Travis's mind was a steel trap running the angles. He noticed a tall crane pylon off to the left, creating a patch of deeper shadow near a column of crates. If he circled around quickly, he might get behind them. It would be a desperate gamble. He sucked in a breath, hugging the container wall, creeping in an arc around the men. Each step felt like it echoed for miles, though in reality the wind and distant waves masked his footfalls. The three hijackers pivoted, listening, cursing. The hostage whimpered, tears glinting in the faint light. At last, Travis reached a vantage point behind a forklift. He had a diagonal shot. The big man with the pistol still had it pressed to the hostage's head. Travis could see the man's finger resting on the trigger, tension coiled. He had to neutralize the one holding the pistol first in a single precise shot, then pivot to drop the other two. The timing had to be perfect. He raised the AR, breath shallow, aligning the sights. A ripple of doubt whispered through him, one missed shot and that crew member was gone. Travis forced himself to trust his skill. He exhaled slowly, controlling the shake in his arms. The crosshairs settled on the thick-set hijacker's temple. Travis squeezed. A thunderclap resounded. Blood sprayed across the deck. The thick-set man dropped like a marionette with cut strings. The hostage scrambled away screaming. The other two hijackers turned, rifles blazing. Travis flinched behind the forklift as sparks flew. The air filled with the stench of burnt metal and the clang of rounds striking steel. He returned fire, aiming through the forklift's gaps. One hijacker screamed and fell. The last man dashed behind crates, seeking cover. Travis took advantage of the lull to dive forward, hooking an arm around the terrified crewman, dragging him behind cover. The hostage was hyperventilating, eyes locked on Travis in confusion and gratitude. "Stay down," Travis hissed. Then he heard footsteps pounding across the deck. The surviving hijacker was retreating or maybe regrouping. Travis carefully peeked around the forklift. The cargo deck was a maze of steel containers. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision. Then a sudden mechanical roar shook the night. Floodlights blazed on from the ship's superstructure, cutting across the deck. Someone had found the external controls for the overhead crane's lighting system. Now Travis was in an illuminated kill zone. He cursed under his breath. So much for stealth. One misstep and a single bullet from an unseen vantage point could end him. Already he could sense a shift. The hijackers knew they had a lethal threat on board. They were regrouping, turning the lights on to pinpoint him. He had to think fast. He offered the crewman a quick nod, pointed him toward the corridor where the captain and others hid. "Go. Stay low." The frightened man scrambled off, flattening himself behind crates as he sprinted away. Travis, rifle raised, surveyed the deck. The overhead floodlights cast harsh shadows behind every crate and coil of rope. It would be easy for hijackers to hide behind that glare. Then, from somewhere behind the containers, a booming voice crackled over a handheld loudspeaker, echoing across the deck. "Whoever you are, drop your weapons and come out. We know you're ex-military. We have your silhouette on the cameras. You can't hide forever. Surrender, and maybe we won't execute every last crew member for your sins." Travis clenched his teeth. The voice carried the lazy confidence of a man used to winning through intimidation. More footsteps. More shifting shadows. They were trying to corner him, flush him out with threats. But Travis Caldwell had survived far worse. He braced himself, letting the adrenaline sharpen his mind. Step by step, he thought. Keep moving. They wanted a standoff. Instead, he'd give them a hunt. Without hesitation, Travis bolted into the labyrinth of containers. If these hijackers wanted a fight, they were about to get all the nightmares they'd never asked for. Travis raced along the narrow aisles between towering containers, the floodlights overhead creating stark angles of blinding brightness and pools of inky dark. His boots thudded on metal decking, echoing in the corridor formed by stacked freight. Behind him, distant shouts signaled the hijackers fanning out. He slung the AR across his back, momentarily favoring silence over firepower. In tight corners, surprise was his best advantage. Heavy breath rasped in his throat as he passed container doors. Each numbered label flickered by in the glare, E105, E106, E107. The massive ship held hundreds like these, forming an industrial maze. A loudspeaker crackled again, the same taunting voice. "You think you can kill us all? This is our domain now. We have the numbers, there's no escape for you." The message repeated in Spanish, presumably for the rest of the hijackers. Travis ignored it. He reached a container that was slightly ajar, its latch broken. Probably rummaged by the hijackers looking for something. He slipped inside, shutting it behind him. Taking a knee, he caught his breath and wiped sweat from his brow. In the confines of the container, the metallic scents of machine parts and packing foam mingled in the stale air. Travis quickly checked his gear. He had 2 spare magazines for the AR plus half a mag left in the pistol. A small utility knife in a sheath on his belt. It wasn't a massive arsenal, but he'd faced worse odds in places like Fallujah and Helmand Province. He recalled the men's repeated references to certain container numbers and that name, Los Barracudas. They specialized in smuggling narcotics and firearms into Florida. Could they be after a shipment of contraband disguised as legitimate cargo? Perhaps the crooked shipping manifest had promised them a huge payday. But he suspected something bigger. These men had come prepared to seize the entire vessel, not just rummage a single container. Outside, footsteps pounded on the deck, accompanied by frantic Spanish chatter over the hijackers' radios. "Lo estamos buscando. We're looking for him." Another voice snapped in frustration. Travis picked out phrases: El Capitan, La Sala de Control, the captain, the control room. They were still trying to gain unwavering command over the ship's systems. Suddenly, the container door rattled. Travis froze. A faint wedge of light appeared at the base. He saw someone's boots shuffle outside. The door handle jiggled again, then stopped. His heart hammered. If the door swung open, he'd have to shoot at point-blank range. The intruder seemed to hesitate, then moved on, cursing under his breath about El Fantasma, the ghost. When the footsteps receded, Travis pushed the door open a crack. The deck corridor was empty. He stepped out, scanning with the muzzle of his pistol. A shout reverberated from somewhere near the stern. Likely they'd found more crew or were systematically searching. Travis took a moment to think. If the hijackers organized themselves properly, they could corner him. That loudspeaker voice had threatened hostage executions, so time was critical. He pictured the ship's layout. The engine room sat aft, the bridge above. The crew living quarters were near the superstructure. If the hijackers maintained those areas, they'd effectively control power and navigation. The deck with the cargo was wide open except for the container labyrinth. The real question was how many hostiles remained. He'd taken out a handful, but there could easily have been 10 to 15 or more. Travis gritted his teeth, flipping the AR's selector to semi-auto. He had to chip away at them. Speed, precision, stealth. Loud clangs echoed from an upper level, footsteps bounding down a metal staircase. Travis crept closer to see. He spotted a group of 3 hijackers with rifles stepping onto the main deck, scanning the container rows. One of them pointed in Travis's general direction, possibly suspecting movement. Another shouted into his radio. Travis dropped into a crouch, pressing himself behind a chest-high crate. The men advanced carefully, weapons up, forming a triangular search pattern. They had some measure of training enough to be dangerous. Travis steadied his breathing, nestling his AR stock against his shoulder. He lined up a shot on the man furthest in the back. If he took him out first, the others might panic and offer openings. But just as he took aim, a new sound erupted, the guttural roar of an engine. A flood of bright light swept across the deck. Travis flattened himself as a forklift emerged from behind stacks of pallets, driven by a scrawny hijacker. The forklift's headlights illuminated the corridor, revealing Travis's cover. The group of 3 instantly homed in on his position, shouting, "Aliesta! There he is!" A stream of bullets peppered the crate. Wood splintered. Travis rolled onto his stomach, returning fire with 2 quick bursts. The forklift driver jerked, slumped over the steering column, causing the forklift to veer wildly. It slammed into a row of containers with a metallic crash. Meanwhile, the other hijackers dove for cover. Travis scrambled, shifting position. Bullets zipped past, rattling the deck. He found a vantage behind a steel support column. The 3 men regrouped behind a stack of crates, exchanging shouted commands. Travis took aim again, careful not to expose himself. A muzzle flashed from behind the crates, forcing him back. The staccato ring in his ears grew louder. He reached into a pouch on his belt and retrieved a small flashbang he'd brought along, one of the few pieces of advanced gear he managed to sneak with him. He yanked the pin, lobbed it high over the crates. It clattered to the deck near the hijackers and erupted in a deafening bang and blinding flash of light. Seizing the moment, Travis darted around the left side of the column, rifle at the ready. The hijackers were disoriented, covering their ears, blinking furiously. Travis fired 2 precise shots, dropping the first. The second staggered, wounded. The third reeled, trying to bring his rifle up. Travis's final shot tore through the man's chest, and he collapsed with a ragged gasp. Smoke and the bitter smell of gunpowder clung to the air. Travis crouched, scanning the area. The forklift's engine hissed quietly, headlights still shining crookedly into a corner. No more immediate threats. His gaze flicked to the wounded hijacker lying among the crates, clutching his side. The man groaned, eyes filled with pain. For an instant, Travis felt the old moral weight. Killing in self-defense was one thing, but leaving someone to suffer was another. He inched forward, weapon trained on the hijacker's chest. "Drop your gun," Travis commanded, voice low. The hijacker's rifle was a few inches away. Slowly, with trembling hands, the man pushed it aside. His chest heaved, a wet red stain spreading on his shirt. "Per favor," the man gasped, presumably begging for mercy. Travis blinked. As a Marine, he'd been trained to neutralize threats, not execute them. But these men had stormed a civilian ship, shot innocent crew. Hostages were still at risk. He refused to let pity cloud his judgment. "You have a choice," Travis told the man in Spanish. "Tell me how many of you are left on this ship or you bleed out here." The hijacker's eyes flickered with desperation. He coughed, spitting blood. "Quince, maybe, less now. But you'll never beat Santos." "Santos?" Travis pressed. "Santos leads Los Barracudas. He's in charge." The man wheezed. "He'll kill you." Travis snorted softly. "Not if I kill him first." The man gave a hollow laugh, then groaned in pain. "You're already dead." "He has reinforcements." Travis eyed him. "Where's Santos?" The hijacker's mouth twisted. He's up in the bridge, trying to steer us to a remote cove. We're meeting more of our men in small boats." He winced, blinking sweat from his eyes. Travis digested this. So they aimed to divert the Horizon Sun from its planned route, presumably to offload something. Or maybe to take it to a hidden location. If they had reinforcements waiting, this could turn into a full-on siege. He knew the next logical step, secure the bridge. If Santos controlled navigation, the entire operation would revolve around that vantage. But that also meant Santos might have the crew pinned as hostages. Travis exhaled. He glanced at the hijacker, who was now going pale, chest rising in shallow gasps. The man was living on borrowed time unless he got medical care. Travis wasn't sure he could keep him alive. Still, he ripped off part of the man's sleeve, pressed it to his side in a makeshift attempt to slow the bleeding. The hijacker moaned, not expecting the mercy. "Stay quiet," Travis said tersely, slipping away. Some part of him wanted to ensure the man wouldn't rearm and stab him in the back. But the hijacker was in no condition to do much more than breathe. If he died, he died. Travis had bigger worries. He rummaged through a small kit the hijacker carried, finding extra ammo for the rifles compatible with his own. He pocketed it, feeling a jolt of relief at having more rounds. Then he faded back into the shadows of the container rows, heading for the superstructure ladder that led to the upper decks. A new wave of tension washed over him. The fight thus far had been scattered engagements. Santos and whatever men he still commanded would be more fortified. They might place watchers on the bridge's approach, possibly booby traps. As Travis navigated the deck, he passed the occasional body. Some were hijackers, some unfortunate crew. His jaw tightened. He pressed on, reminding himself that if he wavered now, more would die. That had been the essence of every mission in his recon days, do the unthinkable so innocents might live. Soon, the white steel bulk of the superstructure rose before him. A wide metal staircase spiraled up one side, leading to the main entrance. The overhead floodlights cast glaring beams on the steps. It was too exposed. If anyone was perched with a rifle up there, he'd be a sitting duck. He took a different route, circling around the rear of the superstructure, clinging to the edges of stacked lifeboats. The strong wind whipped across the open deck, carrying the stench of fuel and ocean brine. Now and then he heard echoes of distant gunfire, maybe the last pockets of resistance from the crew. Then came an abrupt hush, as if the ship itself held its breath. Eventually, he found a maintenance ladder that ran vertically up the back of the superstructure. It wasn't meant for general traffic, maybe for painting or exterior repairs. He tested the rungs. Solid enough. Keeping his rifle slung, he climbed steadily, heart pounding. One slip and he'd clatter onto the deck below. The wind tugged at his clothes. He paused at the first landing about 2 stories up. The door into the superstructure was locked from the inside. He saw no easy way in. He continued climbing. At the 3rd story, an open hatch offered a route. Travis peered through, seeing a dimly lit corridor. No movement. Slowly, he pulled himself inside, pressing his back to the wall. Inside, the hallway smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Overhead fluorescents buzzed softly. Voices drifted from somewhere further ahead. Travis advanced in a low crouch, passing closed cabin doors. He mentally mapped out the ship's interior from memory. The bridge was likely a few corridors away, up another small flight of stairs. At an intersection, a hijacker suddenly emerged from a side door, nearly colliding with Travis. The man's eyes went wide, but Travis was faster. He slammed his rifle but into the hijacker's face, sending him sprawling with a muffled groan. Travis quickly pressed a knee into his chest, covering his mouth to muffle any shout. A swift chop to the temple knocked him unconscious. Travis exhaled, listening. No one else in that cabin, apparently. He dragged the unconscious man inside. The room was some sort of storage closet filled with cleaning supplies. Travis tied the man's wrists with a length of nylon rope he found. The hijacker was out cold for now, but if he woke up, he'd be out of the fight, at least temporarily. He continued, ear straining for any clue to the location of Santos. More than once, he considered if he could hail the Coast Guard. But the mention of jamming equipment made him wary. They might have specialized gear blocking signals. He'd have to retake the bridge, or at least sabotage the jammers to call for help. Then he caught a flicker of motion near the stairwell leading to the uppermost level. 2 hijackers posted as guards. They stood on opposite sides of the corridor, rifles slung, scanning half-heartedly. They seemed nervous, aware that the ghost had been systematically eliminating their comrades. The overhead lights hummed, reflecting the tension in every line of their posture. Travis carefully lifted a small metal bracket from the floor, a leftover from some maintenance job. He hurled it down the corridor behind them. It clanged, echoing loudly. Both hijackers jerked, spinning around to aim at the source of the noise. Seizing their momentary distraction, Travis lunged forward, silent as a predator. The first hijacker pivoted, eyes widening, but too late. Travis buried a knee in his gut, driving the muzzle of his AR upward into his jaw. A sharp crack, and the man crumpled. The second hijacker whirled, finger on the trigger. Travis flung himself to the floor. The rifle barked, muzzle flash lighting the corridor. Bullets splintered the wall above Travis's head. He returned fire from his prone position. One shot found the hijacker's leg, spinning him sideways. The man yelped, dropping his rifle. Another shot from Travis ended his shriek, hitting him in the chest. Panting, Travis shoved the body aside. Blood pooled across the floor, seeping into the old tile. He forced himself not to dwell on the grisly sight. War was never neat. Now, with the corridor momentarily clear, he made his way up the final staircase, which led to the ship's bridge. He paused near the top, hearing voices. "Donde está ese maldito francotirador? We've lost too many men. We keep this bridge until Santos says otherwise." Travis counted at least 3 distinct voices. Possibly more inside. The door was partially open. He risked a quick glance. The bridge was a spacious area lined with windows, the main helm console in the center, radar and communication terminals arrayed around. He saw 2 hijackers crouched by the door, rifles ready, scanning the approach. Another patrolled near the helm. He could not see the far side of the room where presumably Santos and any hostages might be. Travis swallowed. Storming a defended position through a single door was a lethal proposition even for a trained recon Marine. He needed to create a diversion or find an alternate entry. But the bridge typically had only one main hatch and maybe an emergency exit. If that exit was locked, he'd still have to breach it. He retreated a few steps, scanning the walls and ceiling. He noticed a vent panel overhead large enough for ventilation wiring. It might offer a vantage or at least allow him to toss a flashbang. He felt along the panel's edge. It was held by small screws, not heavy bolts. Quietly, he worked his knife under the lip, prying it open. Inch by inch, it gave way. The corridor behind him remained silent. Once the panel was loose, Travis hoisted himself up using a metal crossbeam to support his weight. The space was cramped. Warm air circulated from somewhere deeper in the ship. He inched forward, elbows scraping dusty ductwork. If he could get above the bridge itself, maybe he could find a point to drop a flashbang or at least see inside. After a few painstaking feet, he found a grid-like vent that looked down into the bridge. Through the slats, he glimpsed the scene below. 4 hijackers in total. 2 near the door as guards, 1 at the helm scanning charts, and a tall figure in a black tactical vest pacing at the center, rifle slung over his shoulder. He had an aura of command, likely Santos. And there, in the far corner, huddled the captain and 2 officers, hands tied behind their backs. They looked bruised but alive. Another limp form lay near them. Travis's jaw tightened, possibly an unconscious or dead crew member. Santos spoke sharply into a handheld radio. "Where's everyone?" he demanded. "We're supposed to be meeting the boat soon. Focus on steering, turn starboard." The hijacker at the helm complied, adjusting the rudder. The deck under Travis's knees trembled slightly as the ship changed course. One of the guards looked nervous. "Boss, we lost contact with the team on the lower deck. Nobody's responding. We might be outnumbered." "Impossible," Santos snapped. "There's only one man, some ex-soldier. Do you really think he can kill every last one of us?" "Stop whining." But he sounded less certain than before. Travis sized up the situation. If he dropped a flashbang from above, he might stun them momentarily, but the hostages were in the corner. A risk of collateral damage was high, especially in a confined space. But if he did nothing, Santos would likely keep redirecting the ship to meet reinforcements. Then Travis would be overwhelmed. He had to strike. Even if it meant risking the hostages, the alternative was letting these men take complete control and kill everyone anyway. Travis steeled himself. He carefully reached down to his belt, pulling out his final flashbang. Once he deployed it, there would be no second chance. Leaning close to the vent, he prepared to drop the canister, heart hammering in his chest. This was it. If his aim was off or Santos reacted faster, the hostages could die in the crossfire. Adrenaline coursed through Travis like liquid fire. With measured precision, he pulled the pin and let the flashbang slip through the slats. He closed his eyes tight, bracing. A half-second passed, a lifetime in combat. Then an eruption of light and noise exploded beneath him, shaking the bridge with a deafening thunderclap. Travis yanked the vent panel aside, dropping through in a swift motion. His boots hit the floor. Disoriented shouts filled the air. White smoke and lingering brilliance clouded the room. The hijackers reeled, clutching their ears. Travis took aim at the guard nearest the hostages, double-tapping him in the chest. The second guard fumbled with his rifle. Travis's AR spat again. The hijacker collapsed, screaming. The man at the helm dove behind the console, returning fire blindly. Bullets zinged off overhead instruments. Travis ducked behind a metal support. Sparks rained down. The console's glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. In the swirling haze, Travis spotted Santos, covering his eyes, staggering a step. Then, as if by pure reflex, Santos whipped up his rifle and fired a wild burst. Travis felt a round tear across his shoulder, a searing flash of pain. He clenched his teeth, ignoring the burn. He fired a controlled burst at Santos's torso. The tall hijacker stumbled, letting out an enraged grunt, as if wearing body armor that absorbed part of the impact. Meanwhile, the man behind the helm console popped up, tried to line a shot. Travis swung his AR, squeezed the trigger. Click, empty. He yanked the pistol from his holster, firing 3 times in quick succession. The helm hijacker pitched forward, dropping with a dull thud. Santos snarled, shaking off his partial blindness. He lunged to the side, taking cover behind an instrument panel. Travis heard him curse in Spanish, voice ragged with pain. The next instant, automatic fire sprayed the bridge. Travis dove, glass shards crunching under his boots. Bullets ricocheted, smashing the overhead lights. Darkness pressed in, lit only by the faint glow from the windows and the flickering remains of console screens. It was a lethal dance now, Travis and Santos, two men locked in final combat. Travis rolled behind a metal console, breathing fast. His shoulder ached, warm blood trickling. He pressed a hand to it, felt the sticky dampness. He had to end this quickly. Santos hissed from behind his cover, "You can't win, Hamano. More of my men will come." "No," Travis shot back. "They're all dead or dying." A half-delirious laugh escaped Santos. "Lies. Even if you kill me, you'll never get off this ship alive. The barracudas will hunt you down." Travis grit his teeth. He didn't bother responding. Instead, he swept his gaze around for an angle. The battered console near Santos's position had a reflective panel. Through it, Travis caught a distorted glimpse of Santos, crouched, reloading. Without hesitation, Travis pivoted around, leveling his pistol. He fired twice. The muzzle flash illuminated Santos's figure. One bullet struck him in the shoulder, the other catching him high in the chest. He stumbled, dropping his rifle with a clatter. With a ragged breath, Santos tried to lift his sidearm. Travis advanced, each step echoing. The tip of Travis's pistol hovered inches from Santos's forehead. Santos's eyes blazed with hatred. A roar of defiance escaped the wounded hijacker. He tried to raise his gun, but Travis fired, cutting off the motion. Santos went limp, eyes rolling back, body thumping to the deck. Silence followed, broken only by Travis's ragged breathing and the crackle of damaged electronics. One by one, the console lights fizzled, the entire bridge left in faint emergency lighting. He stumbled, leaning on a wall, pain lancing through his shoulder. But it was done, he hoped. He glanced toward the corner. The captain and the other officers huddled, still bound. One looked absolutely stunned. Another wept in relief. Travis holstered his pistol and rushed over, ignoring the flare of pain. He carefully cut their bindings with his utility knife. "Is everyone okay?" Travis asked softly. The captain coughed, tears brimming in his eyes. I think so. You saved us." Travis shrugged off the gratitude with typical stoicism. "We're not out of the woods yet. Are there more hijackers on board?" The first mate shook his head in disbelief. "We heard the gunfire. It sounded like the entire ship was under siege. But everything's quiet now." Travis forced himself to remain vigilant. "We need to secure the rest of the deck, confirm the threat is gone, and check for survivors. Then we signal the Coast Guard." He stumbled slightly, dizzy from blood loss. The captain grabbed him. "You're hurt." He reached for a first aid kit stored in a cabinet near the helm. Travis winced, letting them patch his shoulder. "I'll live." He remembered the hijackers' earlier warning about reinforcements. Perhaps the Coast Guard had received that partial mayday. If not, they needed to send one immediately. As the captain pressed gauze to his wound, Travis surveyed the bodies on the bridge. Santos's lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling. The others were similarly still. For better or worse, the immediate threat here was over. But as Travis met the captain's gaze, a haunted feeling gnawed at him. Something in the back of his mind whispered that not all was settled. There were references to more men, to meeting with boats. Maybe the reinforcements were on their way. Time was short. If they came, Travis and the exhausted crew might have to fight again. He quietly reloaded his weapons, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. The captain switched on the emergency comms, hoping the jamming was disabled with Santos dead. A static-laced connection crackled. Then, just as the first glimmer of hope rose, a new voice boomed over the radio. "Attention, Horizon Sunday. This is the U.S. Coast Guard. We received a partial distress signal. Please respond." Travis exchanged a relieved glance with the crew, though tension still lingered. They had lifelines now. But would the Barracuda's reinforcements intercept them first? Travis took the radio mic from the captain. "Horizon Sun here," he said, voice husky. "We've been hijacked, but the attackers are mostly neutralized. We have wounded. Request immediate assistance." The radio hissed. "Roger that, Horizon Sunday patrol vessel inbound. ETA is under an hour." Travis felt a small measure of relief. He sunk against the wall, letting the stinging pain in his shoulder wash over him. The immediate danger was past, but an hour was plenty of time for new horrors to unfold. He had to be ready. Suddenly, an alarm klaxon blared on the bridge console, its lights flickering. The panel displayed a blinking warning: cargo hold flood sensor activated. The captain's face went pale. They must have sabotaged something. They might be sinking the ship. Travis's eyes narrowed. "All right," he said, voice steady. "We secure the hull. We can't let this ship go down." The shrill alarm resonated in the bridge, echoes vibrating through the dim corridors of the Horizon Sun. Travis steadied himself against the helm console, ignoring the stabbing pain in his shoulder. The captain was furiously tapping at the controls, attempting to override the alarm. "Something triggered the lower deck flood alarms," the captain muttered. "If water's pouring in, we'll lose buoyancy fast. We need to check the pumps or patch any damage before it's too late." Travis inhaled, pushing past fatigue. "I'll go down. You keep trying to stabilize. Coast Guard's en route, but an hour's a long wait if the ship is taking on water." One of the officers, eyes bloodshot from the ordeal, shook his head. "You're injured. Let me go." Travis's gaze hardened with the old leadership reflex. "I can handle it. You stay with the captain in case more hijackers are lurking." He lifted his AR, slung it across his back. "Where's the main pump control station?" "Deck 3, stern section," the captain replied. He pointed to a blueprint on the wall. "But the corridor might still have hostiles." Travis nodded. "I'll handle it." He stepped away, ignoring the throbbing in his wounded shoulder. Blood had crusted along the edges of the makeshift bandage, but at least it wasn't actively streaming. Carefully, he moved to the bridge exit. No immediate sign of movement in the corridor. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dull orange glow. Behind him, he heard the captain's anxious voice crackling over the radio, trying to coordinate with the Coast Guard. As Travis descended the narrow stairwell, the tension pressed on him like a physical weight. The hijackers might have placed explosives or intentionally compromised the hull to scuttle the ship if their plan went sideways. If that was the case, time was critical. At the second landing, he paused. A faint scuff of footsteps on the deck below. Another figure moving in the gloom. Travis eased around the corner, rifle up. The shape turned out to be the same ship's officer he'd armed earlier, the one he rescued from execution near the cargo holds. The man's name tag read Rodriguez. "Thank God," Rodriguez whispered upon seeing Travis. "Some of the crew are gathered in the mess hall. I was searching for survivors but also found a few more hijackers dead." "You did all that?" "Had to," Travis said simply. "Glad you're alive." "Any sign of them sabotaging the hull?" Rodriguez shook his head. "No, but there's water in the lower compartments. I heard hissing pipes." Travis took a steadying breath. "We'll check the pump controls. Come on." Together, they slipped down another flight of stairs to Deck 3. The corridor there was partially flooded, an inch of water covered the floor, rippling with the ship's movement. A flickering overhead light revealed a mess of twisted metal piping in the far corner, and water sprayed from a ruptured valve, splashing across the wall. The hiss was as loud as a boiler. Travis and Rodriguez waded through the water. The door to the pump station was sealed with a heavy wheel lock. Travis spun the wheel. The door groaned open, revealing a cramped machinery room. Inside, a large control panel, banks of pumps, and multiple valves lined the walls. One of the pumps was off, its indicator lights dark. Another was running at partial capacity. A blinking red warning light indicated a manual override had been triggered. Rodriguez cursed softly in Spanish, stepping forward to study the panel. "This has been tampered with. Looks like they cut power to half the pumps. If we don't restart them, compartments will flood." Travis nodded. "Can you fix it?" "I can try." The officer began flipping switches, entering codes. "We're also losing pressure in the starboard side. If the leak isn't sealed, the pump will just cycle water in and out without stopping the flood." A heavy thud from behind startled them. Travis whipped around to see the pump station door slam shut. A figure on the other side turned the wheel lock from the corridor. "No, no, no," Rodriguez shouted, lunging for the door. He yanked at it in vain. Travis felt cold dread. They were trapped. The door's narrow window revealed a single hijacker, apparently one who'd escaped the earlier carnage. He sneered through the glass. A battered bruise lined his jaw, perhaps from a previous scuffle. Without warning, the hijacker raised a pistol and fired through the window, a spiderweb of cracks blossoming in the safety glass. Travis dove aside, dragging Rodriguez down with him. "We're pinned," Rodriguez hissed, panic in his eyes. Bullets punched more holes in the glass, shards tinkling on the wet floor. Travis grimaced. The door was thick steel, the window was the only real vulnerability, but that also meant it was too small a target for him to easily return fire. Instead, he pressed his rifle muzzle to an unbroken corner of the window and squeezed off a single round. The bullet shattered more glass, forcing the hijacker to flinch back. In that split second, Travis scrambled to his feet, grabbed the wheel lock from inside, and pulled with all his might. Metal groaned. The hijacker on the other side fought back, leaning his full weight to keep it locked. The stalemate left them at an impasse. Rodriguez swore under his breath. "He's not letting go. We're trapped." Travis scanned the machinery room. He spotted a large tool chest near the back, the top open, revealing wrenches, crowbars, a cutting torch. The torch might let them cut through the door's hinges, but that could take precious time, and the water level was slowly rising even here. Another half-inch had crept across the floor. They needed a faster solution. Suddenly, a half-broken idea formed. That forklift battery or some portable generator parts, they're often stored in these compartments for emergency repairs. We might be able to rig a short circuit, blow the door's locking mechanism open from inside. Rodriguez shook his head uncertainly, wiping water off his face. We do have a small battery in the corner used to jumpstart the emergency generator. But if we mess this up, we'll blow ourselves up. Travis's expression was grim. We don't have many options. The hijacker's not going to open that door. And we can't cut through in time to save the ship from flooding. They waded to the corner where an orange-cased battery sat. It had thick cables coiled around it. In a side bin, Travis found some spare wiring. We rigged this to the door's locking motor, cause a power surge. That might disengage the mechanism or fry it so the wheel can turn freely. Rodriguez swallowed. I know a bit about electronics, but this is crazy. Travis shrugged. Better than drowning. He covered Rodriguez as the man set to work, peeling back cable insulation with a small multi-tool, splicing wires with trembling hands. Travis kept the muzzle of his AR pointed at the door window in case the hijacker tried to shoot again. Through the fractured glass, Travis glimpsed movement in the corridor. The hijacker seemed to be pacing, uncertain. Possibly he was calling for backup. Time was not their ally. The water in the machinery room now rose to mid-calf. Hurry, Travis urged quietly. Rodriguez twisted the last wire into place, hooking it to the battery's terminal. Okay, I need to clamp these leads to the door's motor control. When I say go, flip that switch on the battery pack. Travis moved to help, pressing the leads onto the mechanism near the lock motor. The metal was slick with condensation. Water dripped from overhead pipes. Now? Rodriguez braced himself. Now. Travis flicked the battery switch. A harsh pop rang out, followed by an acrid smell of burning circuitry. Sparks danced along the door panel. The wheel mechanism jerked, rotating slightly with a metallic clang. For a moment, Travis thought it had failed. Then a loud crack signaled that the lock motor had sheared. Rodriguez lunged at the door wheel, throwing all his weight into it. This time, it spun freely. The door inched open. The startled hijacker outside tried to slam it shut again, but Travis shoved the muzzle of his AR through the gap, pressing into the hijacker's side. He fired one shot. The hijacker stumbled back with a guttural cry, dropping his pistol. Travis wrenched the door open the rest of the way and hammered the butt of his rifle into the hijacker's temple. The man collapsed on the flooded corridor floor. Breathing hard, Travis quickly checked the corridor. No immediate reinforcements. The hijacker's eyes rolled back, unconscious or dying from the chest wound. Rodriguez sagged against the doorframe, relief flooding his features. We did it. Now let's get that leak under control. They re-entered the pump station. Rodriguez finished resetting the main pump controls. Gradually, the whir of machinery rose in pitch, indicating the pumps were firing at full capacity. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom speaker in the corner, pump status stabilizing. I see water levels dropping on the readout. Good work. Travis exhaled, lifting the rifle strap off his sore shoulder for a moment of relief. We need to do a thorough sweep, make sure no more sabotage is in place. Rodriguez nodded. I'll gather any crew I can find who can handle a weapon. We'll check each compartment. A part of Travis yawned to collapse from exhaustion, but he remembered the threat of reinforcements. Be careful. The Barracudas might have signaled more of their men. If you see any small boats or suspicious vessels approaching, sound the alarm." Rodriguez swallowed. "Understood." He shot Travis a grateful look. "You saved us all, you know." "Thank you." Travis simply nodded, stoic. He turned to exit, the water sloshing around his ankles. Even with the pumps active, some areas would remain flooded for hours. At least the ship wouldn't sink. As he headed back up the stairs, the pounding in his shoulder intensified. Each step sent a jolt through his arm. He had to check the wound properly soon, maybe the medkit on the bridge. But first, he'd confirmed they were secure. On deck 2, he found a group of crew members, 4 men and 2 women, huddled with improvised weapons like wrenches and pipes. Fear glinted in their eyes, but also determination. They recognized Travis from earlier, parted to let him pass. He told them the pumps were back online. "We think all the hijackers are neutralized, but keep your guard up," Travis said. "We'll do a thorough sweep." The group nodded, grateful. Travis made his way up to the bridge again. The alarm had ceased, replaced by a faint hum of electronics. The captain rushed to meet him, relief evident on his face. "We're stable, water levels dropping. The Coast Guard is giving us instructions to hold our position until they arrive. We have partial steering control restored." Travis glanced at the windows. Outside, the horizon was still dark, but faint lights on the water hinted at approaching vessels, perhaps the Coast Guard or something else. He cleared his throat. "Where's the jamming device they used? It might still interfere with full comms." The captain motioned to a corner where a battered black suitcase, wires protruding from it, had been set aside. "We found it after you left. I think it got damaged in the shootout. Our signals are clearer now." Travis nodded. His entire body ached with fatigue. He let out a shaky breath. "Then let's radio the Coast Guard again. Let them know the deck is almost secure, but we might have an unknown number of hijackers still hiding or possibly inbound by boat." The captain agreed, picking up the mic. Travis slumped in a chair, adrenaline draining. He pressed a hand to his bandaged shoulder, feeling fresh warmth, likely bleeding had reopened. A stocky officer with a medical kit approached, kneeling to examine him. Travis didn't protest. As the officer cut away the soaked bandage, Travis let his gaze wander across the dimly lit bridge. Bodies of hijackers lay in corners, their rifles and gear scattered. The first mate had covered them with tarps out of respect for the crew who still had to navigate this space. The battered console flickered with partial readouts. Sparks danced occasionally from bullet-riddled panels. The entire place looked like a battlefield. "Coast Guard is 15 minutes out," the captain announced, lowering the mic. His eyes flickered to Travis. "How's that wound?" Travis winced as the officer applied disinfectant. "Hurts, but I'll live." Outside the bridge windows, searchlights appeared, sweeping across the water. A beam played over the deck, highlighting the forklift crash site and scattered crates. The captain frowned. "That's not the Coast Guard. Wrong angle." Travis tensed. "Then who is it?" They peered closer. A small vessel, low in the water, approached the starboard side. It bore a bright searchlight scanning the horizon sun's hull. Another beam flicked on from a second boat behind it. They maneuvered dangerously close. The radio crackled, but instead of the Coast Guard's call sign, a harsh voice barked in Spanish, "Cut your engines and prepare to offload the cargo or we'll open fire." Travis exchanged a dark look with the captain. So the Barracuda's backup had arrived, right on schedule. Out the window, he saw the flash of muzzle bursts from the small boat, tracer rounds singing into the night sky. A show of force, no doubt. The captain's face turned grim. "They're telling us to power down and let them board." Travis grabbed his rifle, ignoring the protest of the officer still tending his shoulder. "We have a choice: stall until the Coast Guard arrives or fight them off." The captain's brow creased. "They have heavier weapons on those boats, maybe an RPG. Our hull's not meant for a firefight." Travis recalled the battered ship's condition. Another all-out battle might be catastrophic, but letting them board unopposed would be a death sentence. He let out a slow breath. "We stall them, stay defensive. If we can hold out for 15 minutes, the Coast Guard should arrive." The radio erupted again, the voice impatient, "Last warning. Heave to or we blow your deck to pieces." As if to punctuate the threat, a rocket-propelled grenade whooshed overhead, missing the stacks of containers by mere feet. It exploded in the water beyond, sending a plume of spray high into the air. Travis steadied himself, eyes on the swirling searchlights outside. Another wave of adrenaline coursed through him. He thought the ordeal might be over, but now the real storm was upon them. Everyone to defensive positions, the captain shouted to the crew. They're attacking. Travis stood, pain flaring, rifle in hand. This was it, a final stand. He spared a glance at the corridor. Crew members huddled, uncertain but ready. The deck was strewn with leftover hijacker weapons. If they could distribute them among the crew, they might return fire at the boarding parties. Then, with any luck, the Coast Guard would swoop in. Let's move, Travis said, voice strong despite the pain. We only need to hold them off for a few more minutes. Let's show these barracudas they picked the wrong ship. He rushed toward the bridge exit, hearing more blasts reverberate outside. The final chapter of this nightmare had begun, and the sun was still nowhere in sight. A strobing dance of lights and shadows consumed the deck of the Horizon Sun. Two small, fast boats with mounted spotlights circled the ship's starboard flank, cutting arcs across the water. Every few seconds, muzzle flashes punctuated the darkness. The thunder of gunfire ricocheted across the waves as the newly arrived barracudas demonstrated they were not bluffing. From the bridge, Travis Caldwell watched with narrowed eyes. He could make out figures aboard those vessels, at least half a dozen men in each, some brandishing rifles or submachine guns. A glimpse of one man hefting a tube-like launcher confirmed that the rocket-propelled grenade had been no fluke. The first explosive shot had missed. The next might not. The captain stood nearby, trembling with leftover adrenaline. They're demanding we cut engines, allow them to board. They said if we don't cooperate, they'll sink us. Travis's jaw tensed. If we cut engines and let them on board, it'll just be a massacre. They'll seize the bridge again or kill us for revenge. We hold out until the Coast Guard arrives. He glanced at a battered wall clock. According to the last radio contact, they had maybe 15 minutes, 10 if they were lucky. Could they withstand a siege that long? Possibly. But those small boats were agile, and they had at least one RPG. One well-placed shot might punch through the hull at or below the waterline. The crew had patched sabotage once already, but multiple blasts could overwhelm the pumps. The captain licked his lips, fear flickering in his gaze. We can't outrun them in this condition. Our engines are barely at half power. Some of the lines were damaged in the firefight. Travis nodded. So we stay put, keep them from boarding. If they try hooking grappling lines or lowering boarding ramps, we shoot those lines off. We make them pay for every inch of that ladder. Grim understanding passed between them. The interior of the ship was quiet now, the previous hijackers either dead, wounded, or subdued. The handful of surviving crew had armed themselves with confiscated rifles and pistols. They were amateurs next to Travis, but it was all they had. Get everyone to cover, Travis ordered. We'll use the container stacks. Have them spread out in small teams. If the barracudas throw up boarding hooks, shoot them loose. If they attempt an RPG shot, we take out the launcher. We can't let them get comfortable out there. He paused, glancing over his shoulder to see Rodriguez arriving on the bridge. The officer's face still bore the pallor of near-drowning relief, but determination blazed in his dark eyes. A small group of crew members followed, each clutching a makeshift or scavenged weapon. Travis studied them. You all right to fight? Rodriguez swallowed hard, nodding. See, most of us have never fired a gun in anger, but we'll do whatever it takes. Travis clapped him on the shoulder gently, ignoring the pain that flared in his own. Good. Divide into teams. We'll need watchers on both port and starboard sides. But starboard is the immediate threat. Without further debate, they hustled to set up. The captain stayed at the helm, ready to manage whatever meager maneuvering the battered engines could offer. Travis led Rodriguez and several others down to the main deck. The tension in the corridors felt thicker with every step, as if the entire ship were bracing for a final onslaught. When they emerged onto the deck, the wind nearly stole the breath from Travis's lungs. The earlier sabotage had forced the ship to reduce speed, leaving them to bob on the open ocean, an easy target. The overhead floodlights were mostly destroyed or off, but stray beams from the superstructure and the Barracuda's own searchlights revealed the chaotic sprawl of cargo containers and debris. Bodies of hijackers and a few fallen crewmen still lay where they'd fallen. Travis pushed the grisly sights from his mind and fixed on the looming threat. One of the fast boats swung close, about 50 yards away, its engines snarling. Travis glimpsed a lean figure at the helm, clad in dark clothing. Another figure aimed a rifle at the horizon. Sun sparks erupted on the metal deck near the railing, sending the crew scrambling for cover behind a forklift and stacked pallets. Travis dropped to a knee, raised his AR-15, and peered through the sights. He waited for the muzzle flash from the boat to flare again, then he fired a short burst. The shooter on the boat ducked, curses carrying across the water. Next, someone on the boat took up the RPG launcher. An instant later, a whoosh cut through the air, followed by an explosion just beneath the ship's railing. Shrapnel tore across the deck. The shockwave knocked Travis backward. He hit the steel plating with a grunt, jarring his wounded shoulder. Pain flared white-hot. He grit his teeth, rolling behind a container. Rodriguez skidded into cover next to him, breathing hard, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. "They're going to keep firing until we're overwhelmed," Rodriguez rasped. Travis forced himself upright, ignoring the agony. "We have to pick off that RPG gunner." He turned to a female crew member, a short-haired woman who gripped a confiscated hijacker rifle with trembling hands. Her name patch read Singh. "You see that boat?" Travis asked, nodding toward the flicker of muzzle flashes near the water. "Focus your fire on the one with the launcher. Keep him pinned." Singh swallowed, nodding. She braced the rifle on a crate and waited for a lull. The next time the RPG carrier rose to angle his tube, she squeezed the trigger, sending a stream of rounds out over the water. Sparks flew on the boat's hull. Whether she hit the man or just forced him back, it worked. No immediate second rocket followed. A shrill whistle from the port side erupted. One of the other crew teams was shouting that a second boat was circling around. Travis cursed. They were being flanked. The Barracudas wanted to divide the defenders' attention, maybe slip a boarding party up the starboard side while the second boat caused chaos on the port side, or vice versa. "We can't cover both angles from here," Rodriguez said. "We're out in the open." Travis's gaze swept the deck. The main cargo crane towered overhead, its rigging cables dangling. If they could get someone high enough, they might have a vantage to engage both boats. It would be dangerous, but a single sharpshooter above could keep them pinned. He looked at Rodriguez. "Stay with the others. Keep that RPG pinned down." "I'm going up." "Up where?" Rodriguez asked, wide-eyed. Travis pointed to the crane. "That vantage point." Rodriguez stared. "You'll be an open target." Travis's answer was simple. "Not if I'm quick." He sprinted along the deck, weaving between containers. Bullets whined past, striking metal. The deck pitched slightly in the waves, and the smell of salt and cordite burned his nostrils. Reaching the crane's base, he found a steel ladder bolted to its side. He slung his rifle and began to climb. Each rung sent a tremor of pain through his wounded shoulder. He pressed on, body drenched in sweat. The crane arm extended horizontally over the cargo area, about 40 feet above the deck. It offered a decent vantage if he could get out onto the catwalk. Meanwhile, the boat to starboard continued strafing the hull, bullets pinging off container corners. The crew returned sporadic fire, but they were pinned. Another rocket whooshed, slamming into a stack of pallets. Debris rained down. Travis's heart hammered faster. He had to hurry. He climbed onto the crane's top walkway, a narrow platform lined with safety rails. The wind buffeted him from all sides, rattling the metal beneath his feet. Carefully, he crept out along the crane arm until he found a stable spot with partial cover behind the operator's control box. From here, the starboard side lay spread out below. He saw the small boat bobbing on the waves, about 60 yards away, searchlights stabbing the gloom. The port side boat was out of direct sight, hidden by the crane structure itself. But if Travis repositioned after dealing with the starboard threat, he might shift to the other side. He unslung the AR, resting the handguard on the rail for support. The bright glare from the boat's spotlight threatened to ruin his night vision, but he recognized the silhouette of the RPG operator. The man knelt near the boat's bow, reloading. Another figure armed with a rifle stood behind him, scanning the ship's deck for targets. Travis sucked in a steadying breath, ignoring the wind tugging at his hair, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. In Force Recon, he'd learned to become a statue in these moments. Heart rate down, breath shallow, aim unwavering. He lined up the sights on the RPG operator's center mass. A single squeeze of the trigger. The muzzle flash briefly lit Travis's vantage. Through the swirl of night air, he saw the boat gunner jerk sideways, toppling into the water or the bottom of the boat, hard to see. Immediately, the man next to him started firing into the crane's direction, muzzle flashes stuttering. Travis ducked behind the control box. Rounds pinged the crane arm, sparking. He exhaled, then popped up again, shifting his aim to the second man. 3 more shots spat into the night. The boat's searchlight wavered, flickering across the waves as if someone had bumped it. Travis couldn't confirm if that second man was down, but at least he'd forced him into cover. On the deck below, the crew found new confidence. Freed from the relentless rocket threat, they fired in more organized volleys. Travis heard a triumphant cheer from one side as the boat's engine revved, pulling back to a safer distance. Travis swung his gaze to the left side of the crane, trying to see the second boat. It must be near the port quarter, beyond a cluster of containers. The crane's catwalk ended above that same cluster. He weighed his options. Climb back down and reposition on deck, or shift along the crane arm to a vantage that might let him see the boat. The second choice was riskier. The crane's crossbeam was narrower and might not support him well. One slip and he'd plummet 40 feet. Still, time was precious. If the second boat boarded, the crew below would be outflanked. The Coast Guard was minutes away, maybe less now, but the Barracudas only needed a few seconds to toss grapples or scale the hull. Gritting his teeth, Travis eased along the crane's arm. The wind gusted with surprising force, swaying the structure. He moved slowly, hugging the metal. The city of containers below looked like a giant steel puzzle. At last, he found a vantage overlooking the port side. The second boat was moored dangerously close, in the process of lashing onto the hull's rub rail with a large hook. A broad-shouldered man on deck heaved rope upward. Another behind him was preparing to climb. Travis braced, lining up a shot. He aimed for the man tossing the rope. Just as he squeezed the trigger, the entire crane lurched with a sudden roll of the ship. His shot went wide, hitting the boat's railing. Sparks flew. The men ducked. Then, returning fire, bullets rattled the crane, one skipping off the metal near Travis's head. He flattened himself on the catwalk, heart pounding. Staying prone, he steadied the AR along the crane's cross strut. The rope tosser rose again, trying to secure the line. Travis exhaled and sent 2 quick shots. This time, the man cried out, clutching his chest. The rope fell from his hands, and the boat drifted a few feet away from the hull, preventing the immediate climb. The second man scrambled to the helm, apparently deciding to back off to a safer distance. But before they retreated entirely, another figure leaned over the gunwale, unleashing a hail of bullets at the crane. Travis grunted, recoiling as a round ricocheted near him, flinging a shard of metal that sliced his cheek. The sting was hot, but he kept his focus. He snapped off another burst at the muzzle flashes, forcing them to cease. Below, The handful of armed crew members on the port side added their own sporadic shots. Although lacking the precision or training of a marksman, they delivered enough concentrated fire to discourage the boat from closing in. The engine revved, the hull scraping foam as it reversed course. For a moment, Travis dared to hope. Both boats had taken losses. Their RPG advantage was neutralized. Even if they circled and tried again, they knew they faced stiff resistance. The question was, would they keep pressing or cut their losses? Panting, Travis keyed his handheld radio. "Bridge, you there?" Crackling static, then the captain's voice came through. "Yes, is everything all right? We're seeing the boats pull back." "They've lost some men," Travis replied. "We're giving them enough trouble they can't board easily." "Any word from the Coast Guard?" "They're close. We see them on long-range sensors. They should be here in a few minutes. They're requesting we maintain position." Travis exhaled relief. A handful of minutes. He just had to ensure the Barracudas didn't rally for one final push. "Have the deck teams stand by. We keep the pressure on until the Coast Guard arrives." "Understood," the captain said. Travis's shoulders sagged. Blood pulsed from his reopened wound, soaking the bandage. His head spun from exhaustion, yet he remained perched there, scanning the waves. The moonlight glimmered off the boat that had threatened the starboard side. It was now drifting, lights dimmed, perhaps regrouping. The port side boat was also idling at a distance, as though the men aboard were weighing their odds. He keyed the radio again, contacting Rodriguez this time. "Status." Rodriguez's voice sounded triumphant. "No one boarded. We're holding up. Garcia got a bullet graze, but we're okay. The starboard boat is standoffish now." "Good. Hang in there." With that, Travis allowed himself to slip back along the catwalk to the crane's center. He needed to get back to the deck in case the Barracudas tried a close pass or a final rocket shot from some hidden angle. Carefully descending, rung by rung, he reached the base of the crane. As he set foot on the deck, a wave of dizziness nearly toppled him. Black spots danced at the edge of his vision. He braced against the crane's support strut, inhaling deeply. The wound was definitely bleeding again. He could feel warm wetness on his left side. His entire left arm felt numb. But he couldn't stop now. If the Barracudas rushed for a last boarding attempt, the difference between survival and slaughter might hinge on a single determined defender. He staggered behind a container, leaning on it for support, and fished out his radio once more. "Captain," he said, voice hoarse. "Any sign of them launching another rocket?" "Negative," the captain replied. "But we do see them moving out, away from the hull. Possibly they're going to circle around behind us." Travis frowned. The Horizon Sun didn't have a robust stern defense. The engine deck was mostly open, a perfect infiltration spot if they approached from the rear. "Tell the crew in that area to keep watch. I'm heading aft." A wave of throbbing pain rolled through him as he started walking. The deck shimmered with scattered debris and pools of water from the earlier sabotage. Twisted lumps of metal indicated where an RPG round had struck. Now the hush of night closed in, punctuated by the dull roar of the cargo ship's engines and the distant whine of the Barracuda's speedboats. He reached the stern area, where a solitary lifeboat hung on a davit. The ship's large rudder housing rose out of the water below, a faint silhouette in the gloom. One of the crew, a young man with a bandaged arm, leaned on the rail, scanning the perimeter. He flinched at Travis's approach, then relaxed upon recognizing him. "Nothing so far," the young crewman whispered. "They might be waiting for another approach." Travis nodded, pressing a hand to his throbbing wound. "The Coast Guard is only minutes away. If the Barracudas want to board, they'll try soon, maybe from the stern, maybe from the sides. Keep your eyes peeled." The crewman swallowed. "Yes, sir." Travis sank to one knee, searching the darkness. The ocean extended endlessly, broken only by faint lights on the horizon. Likely the Coast Guard or possibly cargo ships far away. For a brief moment, he recalled the countless nights he'd spent in observation hides as a recon sniper, scanning black landscapes for signs of enemy movement. It felt eerily similar, except now he was also the one pinned, with no safe extraction route but to hold out. A flicker of light in the distance drew his focus. It wasn't a muzzle flash, more like a bobbing lantern or handheld spotlight. He squinted. Then, with a faint roar, the light closed in. The outline of a small boat appeared, drifting in near silence along the horizon sun's stern. Travis tensed. "It's them," he hissed to the crewman. "Get ready." The boat's silhouette glided close. Travis spotted at least 3 figures crouching on board. One cut the engine to a near idle, letting the waves carry them. They probably hoped the blacked-out approach would let them slip on board, finishing the job. Travis raised his rifle, leaning into the railing. He aimed for the figure who seemed to be handling a grappling hook. Just before he could fire, a sudden blaze of brilliance streaked through the sky, a flare arcing overhead from somewhere off to the starboard side. It lit the water in ghostly red light. Everyone on the boat froze, heads tilting to see. An amplified voice boomed across the waves. "U.S. Coast Guard, stand down immediately and step away from that vessel." Travis's heart leapt. The cavalry had arrived at last. He glimpsed the outline of a large Coast Guard cutter about 200 yards out, powerful floodlights sweeping the scene. Another flare fired, bathing the waves in a bright glow. The men in the small boat hesitated a fraction of a second. Then, in a mad scramble, they tried to restart the engine at full throttle, presumably to flee. Travis seized the moment, firing 2 bursts into the boat's hull. The lines parted, water spraying as bullets hit. One figure toppled overboard. The boat jerked away, its engine sputtering. Overhead, a searchlight from the Coast Guard vessel locked onto them. A chorus of bullhorn commands and the distinct bark of a .50 caliber machine gun split the night. Tracers streaked from the Coast Guard cutter, impacting near the fleeing boat, sending up columns of spray. The boat whipped around, trying to outrun the searchlight. Meanwhile, on the starboard side, the second Barracuda craft also gunned its engine, angled away to escape. More machine gun fire from the Coast Guard hammered the waves in pursuit. The Barracudas, faced with a superior force, had no real appetite for a stand-up fight. They scattered into the darkness at top speed, engines roaring. Travis exhaled shakily, lowering his rifle. He heard distant Coast Guard radio chatter, instructing the fleeing suspects to heave to or be fired upon. Another barrage of gunfire echoed. The entire sea became a tapestry of lights, flares, and the faint outlines of vessels in motion. The captain's voice came over Travis's handheld radio, trembling with relief. "They're chasing the Barracudas. They're telling us to maintain our position. More Coast Guard units are inbound." Travis slumped against the ship's railing, adrenaline draining. The young crewman next to him let out a ragged laugh. "They saved us," he said, tears welling in the corners of his eyes. "We actually made it." Travis's vision blurred momentarily. Blood loss was catching up with him in a harsh wave of dizziness. He forced a nod, struggling to stay upright. At last, he let himself sag to the deck, back pressed against the rail. The thunder of the Coast Guard's pursuit receded. The immediate threat was gone. His mind reeled with the knowledge that the fight was finally over or close enough. The horizon sun was battered but afloat, the crew alive, and the hijackers either dead or fleeing into the night under pursuit. Through the haze, Travis felt hands on him, rolling up his shirt to examine his wound. The crewman shouted for someone to fetch a medic. Travis tried to speak but couldn't find the words. His entire body felt leaden. Vaguely, He saw the shapes of armed Coast Guardsmen clambering on board, flashlights sweeping the deck, calling out commands. He closed his eyes, letting the blackness wash over him. In the distance, the wail of a Coast Guard siren mingled with the slap of waves against steel. Relief, rescue, the crew was safe. That was all that mattered now. He faded in and out of consciousness, at times seeing glimpses of uniformed medics leaning over him, hooking an 4 into his arm, shouting about stabilizing his vitals. The noise of helicopter rotors thudded overhead, indicating someone had called for an airlift. The world spun, then dissolved again into darkness. When Travis finally regained some sense of awareness, he was lying in a bunk inside what looked like a Coast Guard cutter's infirmary. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A medic in crisp navy blue coveralls leaned over him, checking the dressing on his shoulder. "Easy," the medic said, noticing Travis trying to rise. "You lost a lot of blood. We got you patched up. You're going to be fine." Travis blinked, lips cracking as he tried to speak. "Horizon Sun, the crew? Safe," the medic assured. "We have some of them on board as well. The rest remain on the cargo ship. Our units are escorting it back to port. We're taking you in for a more thorough medical evaluation." Relief flooded Travis's chest. He rested his head back on the pillow, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the throbbing in his shoulder recede under a morphine haze. He had survived, and so had the innocence he'd fought to protect. Yet a new tension flickered at the edges of his mind. He hadn't wanted to be found by official agencies. He'd stowed away on that cargo ship for a reason, to slip into the country off-grid, no questions asked. Now, in the custody of the Coast Guard, that anonymity might vanish. They'd have a lot of questions about who he was and why he was there. Would they believe him, or would he end up entangled in a labyrinth of red tape, forced to justify every bullet he fired? He wasn't sure. Right now, though, he was too exhausted to care. He'd done the right thing, and that was all the justification he needed for himself. Whatever came next, he'd face it. After all, he was a Marine. He'd never flinched from a challenge before. His eyelids grew heavy. He let sleep take him, lulled by the cutter's gentle sway and the soft beep of medical monitors. Tomorrow, the real questions would begin. But at least there was a tomorrow, something the Barracudas had nearly stolen from them all. A dull throb dragged Travis Caldwell to the edges of consciousness. He opened his eyes slowly, the world resolving into the metallic walls and fluorescent glare of the Coast Guard cutter's infirmary. A wave of antiseptic and engine oil drifted around him. Disoriented, he tried to push himself upright. A jolt of pain flared across his shoulder. Bandages covered the bullet wound that had reopened during the final firefight, and 4 lines snaked from his arm to a stand topped with a half-empty bag of saline. He recalled flashes of memory. The hijacking, the pitched battles, the frantic standoff with the Barracuda's reinforcements, and the explosive arrival of the Coast Guard. Relief that he and the Horizon Sun's crew had survived warred with the uneasy realization that now he was in the custody of U.S. authorities. His entire plan to re-enter the country off-grid lay in tatters. A short, compactly built Coast Guard medic approached. Her name tag read Billings. She offered a faint smile. "Easy now. You lost a lot of blood, but you've been responding well to treatment." Travis tried to speak, his mouth dry. "How long have I been out?" "On and off for about 14 hours. Billings pressed a stethoscope to his chest. "We're heading back to port. ETA is another hour or 2, depending on the seas." Travis's gaze flicked around the cramped infirmary. A single bunk opposite his was empty. Monitors beeped softly. "The Horizon Sun? The cargo ship is under escort. Most of its crew remained aboard, but we brought a few of the badly wounded here along with you. They're stable." She hesitated, meeting his eyes. We also have a few surviving hijackers in custody. Some were recovered from the water or found wounded on the ship. Travis's jaw tightened. He wondered how many had survived. Then again, maybe it didn't matter. Let the system deal with them. The medic studied him. You're lucky you got immediate care. Another hour or two, that shoulder wound might have bled you out. Thank you, he said. Just doing my job. And from what I hear, you did a lot more than that. The crew says you practically saved the entire ship. Travis shifted uncomfortably. He'd always shied from praise, especially now that prying eyes might ask who he really was. As if on cue, the infirmary door swung open. A uniformed officer entered, flanked by another who looked more federal than Coast Guard. The second man wore plain clothes, a neat button-down shirt, a small laminated badge clipped to his belt, some acronym or another, possibly DHS or a related unit. The Coast Guard officer gave Billings a nod, then turned to Travis. Mr. Caldwell, I'm Commander Rourke of the U.S. Coast Guard. This is Special Agent Howard, Department of Homeland Security. Travis tried to sit straighter, ignoring the pain. Sir. Howard stepped closer. His eyes were steely, his expression unreadable. We have some questions, he said. The crew of the Horizon Sun described you as a stowaway, yet you helped repel the hijackers with extraordinary skill. They mentioned you might be ex-military. Travis's mind raced. He'd known this moment was coming. He glanced at Rourke, who offered a neutral expression, letting Howard take the lead. Howard continued, We found no passport or identification among your possessions. The shipping manifest doesn't list you. We also uncovered your weapons, unregistered. If you wouldn't mind explaining how you came to be on that ship. Travis cleared his throat. He was too weak and battered to spin elaborate lies, so he defaulted to a version of the truth. I was returning from the Caribbean. My passport was stolen a while back. I arranged discreet passage home because, well, I didn't want trouble. Trouble with whom? Howard pressed. Travis hesitated. He wasn't eager to detail his shadowy past as Force Recon, nor the enemies he'd made in the process. Just people who might track me if I went through normal channels. Commander Rourke folded his arms, a hint of concern creasing his brow. Are you wanted for a crime, Mr. Caldwell? No, Travis met his gaze directly. Nothing like that. I did serve in the U.S. Marine Corps Force Recon, to be exact, but I've been out for several years. I've had issues with certain unscrupulous private contractors who tried to recruit me. Didn't want to be on their radar, so I took the back way home. Howard's lips pressed into a thin line. You realize that's highly irregular, not to mention illegal. Stowing away on a commercial vessel with unregistered firearms. Travis closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. Yes, sir, I do. But if I hadn't been on board, those people would be dead, and the ship would be lost. You can confirm that with the crew. An uncomfortable silence settled. Billings stood nearby, eyes flicking between them. Finally, Commander Rourke cleared his throat. We've interviewed the Horizon Sun's captain and multiple crew. They unanimously credit you with saving their lives. That matters, Mr. Caldwell. Howard looked less inclined to be charitable. Be that as it may, you can't just sneak into the country armed to the teeth. We'll need a thorough debrief. He paused, flipping open a small notepad. In addition, we'd like to know everything about the hijackers, the ones calling themselves Los Barracudas. We have intel indicating they've been operating up and down the Florida coast, smuggling narcotics and weapons. They wanted something on that cargo ship, Travis said. Might be contraband they expected or valuable cargo they believed was on board. Not sure. Rourke nodded. We're still investigating. The ship's manifest is legitimate on paper, but we suspect falsified records. We'll comb every container once we reach port. Howard made a small note, then gave Travis a cool nod. "We'll talk more once you've recovered. For now, rest, but don't get any ideas about slipping away again. We'll have men posted to ensure your cooperation." Travis felt a bitter twist in his gut. He'd never wanted trouble with his own government, only to keep a low profile. Now, it looked like he was knee-deep in official scrutiny. Still, at least he wasn't in handcuffs yet. Howard turned on his heel and left, Commander Rourke trailing after him. The door shut with a metallic click. Billings eyed Travis with sympathy. "I've seen these situations before, but you have the gratitude of everyone on that ship. If that counts for anything, I'd say it'll go easier on you." Travis forced a tired smile. "Here's hoping." He let his head rest against the thin pillow, half-lidded eyes drifting to the overhead lights. Howard's warnings circled his mind. He considered ways to vanish once they reached port, but the weight of his injury, and the simple fact that deserting the situation might brand him a criminal, hung heavy. No, he'd see this through. They docked at a secure facility near Miami's Coast Guard station in the late afternoon. The Florida sun cast long shadows on the pier as the cutter pulled alongside. Travis, bandaged and sore, was escorted off by two uniformed petty officers and walked into a low, concrete building for intake. Inside, the corridors were bright and air-conditioned. They led him to a small, windowless interview room. He half expected the uncomfortable cliché of a single dangling bulb and a mirrored wall, but the space was simply furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and overhead fluorescent lights. A few minutes later, Special Agent Howard entered. He carried a file folder under one arm. "Let's talk, Caldwell." Travis, seated stiffly, gave a curt nod. Howard laid out some papers. "I ran what we could find on your name and partial data from the Marines. You check out a Travis E. Caldwell served as a Force Recon sniper, honorably discharged. But then you vanished off the grid. The system has almost nothing on you after that." Travis's lips thinned. "I preferred it that way." "Why?" Howard's stare bored into him. "Most veterans who want privacy still keep a driver's license, a bank account. You have no known address, no credit cards. You're effectively a ghost." Travis regarded him with weary eyes. "I went private, traveled. I had reasons to avoid certain groups who wanted to rope me into their agendas." Howard studied him, then exhaled. "All right, let's cut to the chase. The Barracudas are a top priority for my department. Smugglers, arms traffickers, suspected of multiple murders. Some of your talents might come in handy if you can provide intel about them. That alone could tip the scales in how we handle your irregular reentry." "You want me to be an informant?" "Something along those lines." Travis bristled. "I only had the bad luck of crossing them on the horizon sun. I'm not connected to them." Howard nodded. "Which makes your perspective unbiased. You survived their hijacking, saw them in action, heard them talk, even took some alive. You might have gleaned details you aren't even aware of. Names, radio frequencies, operational patterns. With your background, you're exactly the kind of witness we need." Travis mulled it over. He had no interest in a drawn-out entanglement with federal agencies. On the other hand, refusing cooperation might land him in legal jeopardy. The memory of those battered crewmen, reliant on his help, reminded him that shutting out the authorities wouldn't serve justice. "I'll answer whatever questions about the hijacking that I can. Beyond that, I don't see how else I can help." Howard studied him for a moment, then signaled acceptance. "We'll start with a debrief. If that proves fruitful, I'll see what I can do about clearing you for reentry properly. Maybe it won't be so complicated." The next hour passed in a flurry of queries. Howard asked for every detail of the hijackers' approach, their numbers, the names they called each other, the weaponry. Travis recounted each corridor shootout, the final confrontation with Santos on the bridge, and the references to meetups with other smuggling boats. He described how some hijackers had worn specific tattoos or said certain Spanish slang. Howard took copious notes, occasionally pressing for clarity. Eventually, he seemed satisfied. This lines up with some intel we've gathered on other Barracuda cells. We appreciate your honesty, Caldwell. Am I free to go? Travis asked, more out of hope than conviction. Howard gave a tight smile. Not exactly. We'll keep you here for a day or two while we sort this out. You'll have a room in the on-site barracks, not a jail cell. But I'm afraid you can't leave the base. Travis nodded grudgingly. I understand. Howard rose, gathering his papers. I'll arrange your temporary quarters. Once we finish investigating the cargo ship's containers, we may have more questions. With that, the agent exited. 2 Coast Guard personnel stepped in, politely gesturing for Travis to follow. The sterile corridors led him to a modest bunk room, containing a few beds lined against the walls and footlockers at each station. No one else was present. A ranking petty officer gave him a respectful nod. This is your space for now, Mr. Caldwell. There's a small lounge and bathroom down the hall. We'll bring you a change of clothes, something to eat. If you need anything, just ask. Thank you, Travis said softly. Once alone, he sank onto the bed, wincing at the pull on his shoulder. He was exhausted bodily, mentally, emotionally. But at least this was better than a jail cell. He exhaled, letting the tension seep out. If cooperating with DHS ended his legal limbo, maybe it was worth it. Still, a small voice inside warned that tangling with the Barracudas was never simple. Santos had died, but that didn't mean the rest were gone. Travis doubted a large smuggling syndicate would let the matter rest so easily. He lay back, closing his eyes. The bunk's thin mattress felt blissful after all he'd endured. Sleep beckoned, and he let it envelop him, hoping that by the time he woke, the world might be less complicated. He awoke to commotion. Faint shouting from outside in the corridor jolted him upright. The overhead light in the bunk room told him it was now evening or nighttime. He wasn't sure how many hours had passed. He slipped out of bed, feet hitting the chilly floor. His shoulder twinged fiercely, but he ignored it, padding to the door. As soon as he opened it, the muffled voices grew clearer. A security risk. We can't keep it quiet, someone hissed. Command wants a discreet approach. Keep the press away. Another voice responded. Travis peered around the hallway corner, seeing 2 Coast Guard personnel, an officer and a petty officer, conversing in hushed, urgent tones. When they noticed him, they halted, exchanging uneasy glances. The petty officer cleared his throat. Mr. Caldwell, sorry for the noise. Everything is fine. We're just dealing with a situation. Travis arched an eyebrow. What kind of situation? The officer hesitated. There's been a development at the port facility where the Horizon Sun is docked. Some unknown assailants tried to get onto the ship's pier. Travis's gut tightened. Are the crew all right? They're safe. The attackers were repelled by local authorities. But 2 suspects escaped. DHS thinks they're part of the Barracudas, maybe an advance team. Travis cursed under his breath. The Barracudas wouldn't just let the matter drop. If they still believed something valuable was on that ship or they wanted revenge, they'd keep coming. Any leads? The Coast Guard officer shook his head. Not yet. The area is under lockdown. We're stepping up security. Travis nodded slowly. And me? You remain here. DHS will brief you if they need more info. With an apologetic shrug, the officer led the petty officer away, leaving Travis standing alone in the corridor. He paced back to his bunk, tension coiling in his gut. The longer he stayed cooped up, the more anxious he felt. If the Barracudas were bold enough to stage an attack at a secured port, they had resources and nerve. He tried to rest again, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he replayed the hijacking in his mind. The references to special cargo, the repeated mention of container numbers. Perhaps the Barracudas believed some extremely valuable contraband was on that ship. Or maybe they had a larger plan, like a sabotage or a message to rival cartels. Hours crawled by. Travis managed a restless doze, only to be startled awake by a knock on his bunkroom door in the morning. A different petty officer stood there, polite but firm. "Special Agent Howard wants to see you. Follow me." Travis rose, pulling on the fresh t-shirt and cargo pants they'd given him. His shoulder bandage was stiff with dried blood, but he felt marginally better than before. He followed the petty officer to the same interview room. This time, Howard wasn't alone. Commander Rourke sat beside him, and also present was a tall, gray-haired man in a formal suit. He looked more senior, with a crisp air of authority. Howard gestured for Travis to sit. "Good morning." Travis took the chair, quietly scanning the trio. The tall man introduced himself as Assistant Director Martin, DHS. "Mr. Caldwell," Martin began in a measured tone, "we're in a difficult spot. Overnight, 2 Barracuda affiliates attempted to access the Horizon Sun at port. We suspect they're searching for something on board, possibly the same cargo that motivated the hijacking." Travis folded his arms. "You're sure it's not just revenge?" Martin nodded. "Could be both. But from the container inspections we've conducted so far, nothing stands out. No major drug caches. No weapons shipments. We're continuing to comb through thousands of crates. But it's tedious." Howard leaned forward. "We also discovered some anomalies in the shipping logs. Certain crate IDs appear multiple times, each with slight variations, like someone used repeated container numbers to conceal contraband. If that's the case, the actual location of this cargo might be hidden. We need to figure out what the Barracudas wanted so badly, and soon." Travis met their eyes. "Why are you telling me all this?" Rourke answered, "Because we believe you might be able to help. You have a unique perspective. You overheard them talk about container numbers, rummaging through the ship. Maybe you recall details that our investigators overlooked." Travis frowned. "I'm not a detective." Howard lifted a hand. "We know, but the only reason the hijackers boarded was to find something. You heard them calling out numbers, compartments. Maybe you can help us pinpoint the container." Travis sighed, thinking back. He remembered glimpses of the men searching the cargo hold, references in Spanish to cajas grandes, big boxes, Los Números E108, or something along those lines. Was it E108 or E208? Hard to be sure. He'd been under fire at the time, focusing on survival. They said something like E108 or maybe E180, Travis mumbled. It was definitely E-something, and they kept talking about a high-value cargo. But I never saw it. Commander Rourke rubbed his chin. "We'll cross-check container E108, E180, any permutations. Are you willing to come to the port with us? Walk the cargo deck, see if anything jogs your memory?" Travis blinked. "You trust me out in the open?" Martin offered a tight smile. "We'll keep you under supervision. But yes, we could use your eyes on the ground. We have the port locked down. We think it's worth a try. The Barracudas might attempt another infiltration. We'd like to stay a step ahead." Travis paused, considering. If it helped unravel the situation and possibly speed up his own exoneration, he was game. "I'll do it." Howard exchanged a glance with Martin, clearly relieved. "We'll head out this afternoon, then. A DHS detail will escort you. The captain of the Horizon Sun is cooperating, so we'll have full access." Rourke stood. "We'll organize transport. Meanwhile, Caldwell, get some breakfast, check your gear. You'll have limited mobility, but we won't cuff you. Just stay close to the team." Travis nodded. Got it. They left and he exhaled slowly. Another day, another twist. This entire fiasco seemed like it would never end. But if accompanying them to the cargo ship helped them unearth what the Barracudas were after, and, in turn, solve the root of all this trouble, then maybe he could finally slip away from the watchful eye of the federal government. He exited the interview room and followed signs to the cafeteria, ignoring the curious glances from Coast Guard personnel along the corridors. The base buzzed with routine operations. Mechanical whirs, radio chatter, footsteps. In the mess hall, he ate a quick meal, scrambled eggs, coffee, toast. More out of necessity than appetite. His mind was preoccupied with the looming confrontation at the port. Later, he was escorted to a black SUV idling at the base's secure entrance. Special Agent Howard and another plainclothes officer waited inside. They waved Travis in. A second DHS vehicle lined up behind them for additional security. As the small convoy pulled away, Travis stared out the tinted window. The Florida sky stretched vibrant and blue, palm trees swaying in the summer heat. Freed from the base, at least temporarily, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He was no fool. This trip could be dangerous if the Barracudas tried another strike. Howard glanced at him from the front passenger seat. "We'll arrive at the port in about 40 minutes. The local police and Coast Guard have cordoned off the area around the Horizon Sun Press is outside the perimeter, so it won't be a circus. For now." Travis nodded, gripping the seat as the SUV merged into highway traffic. He flexed his wounded shoulder, feeling the dull ache. He was alive, but the ordeal was far from over. In his mind, he pictured container rows on the ship, remembering that fateful night. The clang of boots, the muzzle flashes in the gloom. E108 or E180, maybe E208. Just random numbers, but they could hold the key to the entire hijacking. Outside, the sunny Florida landscape blurred by, but Travis's gaze was distant, anticipating the next storm. The sprawling port of Miami spread out like a steel jungle as the DHS convoy rolled through the security gate. Towering cranes loomed overhead, rows of shipping containers stacked neatly in labyrinthine grids. The late afternoon sun cast sharp, elongated shadows across the dockyards. Police vehicles and Coast Guard patrol trucks were stationed at intervals, lights flashing in silent caution. Travis peered from the SUV window. He glimpsed the Horizon Sun moored at a far berth. Its familiar silhouette looked weather-beaten, a testament to the violent hijacking. Small squads of uniformed personnel moved around the gangway, some armed with rifles. Yellow police tape cordoned the immediate area, and beyond that, reporters with cameras jockeyed for vantage points. "Glad they kept the press at bay," Howard muttered from the front seat, eyeing the throng of journalists. "We don't want a spectacle until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The convoy parked near a security checkpoint. As Travis stepped out, the humid Florida air slammed him, a wet blanket of heat and salt. He took a steadying breath, ignoring the prickle of sweat on his bandaged shoulder. A stiff breeze swept across the harbor, carrying the mingled scents of brine, diesel, and seaweed. DHS agents formed a loose perimeter around him, hand resting on their sidearms, an implied suggestion that Travis remain compliant. He couldn't help but bristle slightly, but he understood their caution. They proceeded toward the ship. Up close, Travis saw new scars on the hull from bullet pocks and the remnants of an RPG impact near the middeck. Work crews moved about, performing initial repairs, while forensics teams photographed the damage. At the foot of the gangway, they were greeted by the Horizon Sun's captain. The older man's face lit with cautious relief upon spotting Travis. "Mr. Caldwell," he said warmly, extending a hand. "I'm glad to see you alive and mostly well." Travis shook the captain's hand. "Likewise. How's the crew holding up?" "Shaken but recovering," the captain replied. "Many owe you their lives. They're anxious that the barracudas might return, though with all this security, I doubt they dare." Howard cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Captain, we need access to the cargo hold and full cooperation with your manifest logs." "Of course," the captain nodded, "though we've already had multiple teams searching. But I'll take you wherever you need to go." With that, they boarded the vessel. Travis felt a strange sense of déjà vu stepping onto the deck where chaos had reigned not long ago. Now it was relatively calm, though the atmosphere felt tense, like a place where the memory of violence still lingered. Howard signaled for them to proceed below decks, toward the massive rows of containers in the main hold. The captain led them down a series of ladders and corridors until they reached a broad cargo bay. Here, huge steel doors opened onto the deck area that held rows of shipping containers in carefully arranged stacks. A cluster of investigators, some from DHS, others from Customs and Border Protection, were methodically scanning container barcodes. A forklift beeped as it maneuvered crates aside. Everyone wore reflective vests, talking in clipped, professional tones. "Any luck finding suspicious cargo?" Howard asked one of the investigators. The man shook his head. "A few mislabeled boxes, counterfeit goods, that sort of stuff. But nothing that screams big score. We're only about halfway through. There are thousands of items, multiple decks." The captain shrugged helplessly. "Our official manifest was legitimate. If someone tampered with the data, it wasn't me." Howard nodded, then turned to Travis. "We're hoping a walkthrough might jog your memory. Where exactly did you fight the hijackers when they were rummaging for cargo?" Travis scanned the aisles. It looked so different in daylight, stripped of the flickering emergency lights, muzzle flashes, and swirling smoke. He recalled darting between containers labeled with E-series numbers. He noticed that each container block had letter number identifiers stenciled on the sides, about 6 feet off the ground. "Down this way," he said, pointing to a corridor formed by 2 rows of stacked crates. They were searching for something near. I want to say they were calling out something like E108 or E180, but everything was so chaotic. They moved deeper among the containers, the steel corridors echoing with the hum of forklift engines. Travis ran a hand along the side of one container. The stenciled label read E104. Farther on, E106, E107. They followed the sequence. When they reached the section where E108 and E109 should have been, they found rows of closed, sealed containers. A DHS agent stepped forward to check a digital record on his tablet. "We inspected E108 yesterday. It contained clothing shipments for a retail chain. All legit. E109 is next up. Some electronics from East Asia. We'll open it soon." Travis frowned. But the hijackers specifically mentioned E108 or 180. "Are there containers labeled E180? Possibly on a different deck," the agent said. "This ship has multiple cargo levels. Let's check." He tapped on the tablet, scanning. "Yes, E180 is actually on the lower deck. We haven't gotten to it yet because they loaded it last in the manifest queue. Let's head there." They followed a ramp that descended to another expansive cargo area. The lighting was dimmer here, overhead lamps casting long shadows. Towering stacks of containers lined the bulkheads. The hum of ventilation fans echoed, stirring the warm air. As they navigated the rows, Travis's pulse thumped heavier. He caught sight of battered bullet holes in some container walls, evidence of the nighttime firefight. The letters E1XX were visible on many. Far at the end of one row, he finally spotted E180. The container was a dull gray, with a padlocked latch and a shipping seal. "This is it," the DHS agent said, referencing his tablet. "Manifest states it's carrying industrial machine parts. supposed to be from a supplier in South America, bound for a US warehouse. Nothing unusual on paper. Howard's expression darkened with skepticism. Let's crack it open. If the Barracudas were after something, maybe it's hidden inside. A CBP forensics tech approached with bolt cutters, quickly snapping the padlock. Another used a small device to read the electronic seal. It showed a valid code, meaning it hadn't been officially broken. Once the seal was removed, they heaved the container doors open. Inside, pallets were wrapped in plastic. The interior was dim, lit only by the overhead cargo bay lights. The forensics tech climbed in, carefully slicing the plastic on one pallet to reveal metal components. Long rods, gears, brackets, nothing that looked obviously illicit. The brand labels read in Spanish, apparently for industrial conveyor belts or packaging machines. Howard exchanged glances with Travis, then motioned the tech to probe deeper. They peeled away the next pallet's plastic. Again, more metal components. Travis felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe they'd hit a dead end. Suddenly, the tech froze. Wait a minute! He tapped a hollow-sounding portion of a crate. Using a small crowbar, he pried it open. Beneath a shallow layer of machine parts, there appeared to be a metal-lined compartment. The tech shined a flashlight inside and cursed. He reached in, withdrawing a rectangular package wrapped in dense plastic. With gloved hands, he sliced it open, revealing a brick of a white, powdery substance. Cocaine, the tech said grimly. Lots of it. He pointed the flashlight deeper, revealing row upon row of similar packages stacked like hidden cargo. Howard cursed under his breath, face darkening. Looks like we found the mother lode. So that's what the Barracudas wanted. Travis felt a grim sense of confirmation. They'd gone through all that carnage to intercept a massive drug shipment. Possibly the shipping container was arranged by a rival cartel or a separate smuggling ring, and the Barracudas intended to hijack it for themselves. The CBP forensics team methodically pulled out more packages, stacking them on the container floor. Each plastic-wrapped brick was stamped with a stylized fish symbol. A barracuda? Or maybe some other mark. Either way, it was a huge haul. The tech's eyes were wide. We're talking hundreds of kilos here. Street value in the tens of millions. Howard exhaled slowly. No wonder they risked a hijacking. Then he turned to Travis. This confirms the puzzle. The Barracudas must have known or suspected this container was on board. That's why they came in force. The captain, who had been peering in from behind them, looked aghast. We had no idea. This is all part of a standard cargo run. I'm sure the shipping documents were falsified, but, God, he shook his head in dismay. Howard clapped him on the shoulder, almost reassuringly. We know. You and your crew are victims in this. We'll handle the investigation. For now, let's secure this container. The Barracudas clearly want it bad. As if on cue, a DHS radio crackled. One of the outside agent's voices came through, tense. We have suspicious movement near the perimeter. Unmarked van pulled up. Keep sharp. Travis and Howard exchanged glances. The Barracudas? Possibly. Another stakeout or infiltration attempt. The discovery of the cocaine only confirmed how valuable their target was. A wave of adrenaline lit Travis's nerves. Even with the heavy security presence, the Barracudas had proven bold. They might try a direct assault, he murmured. Howard keyed his radio. Units on perimeter maintain eyes on that van. Stop them if they breach any restricted area. Over. The team hustled out of the container. Forensics sealed the cocaine back up for evidence, but they'd obviously keep a watch on it. Howard signaled for the group to regroup in the corridor. We'll place armed guards here. Let's not give them a chance to slip in. Travis followed as they made their way topside, the tension thick in the air. When they reached the main deck, The sinking sun tinted the sky in hues of orange and red. DHS agents in tactical gear paced across the pier, rifles at the ready. Police sirens echoed in the distance. A man with a radio stood near the gangway, giving them an update. Local patrol approached the suspicious van. It sped off. We got partial plates, possibly stolen. No pursuit yet. Howard frowned. They're testing our defenses, probably scoping for weaknesses. Travis surveyed the cluster of uniformed officers. If they realize we found the cargo, they might escalate. That's millions of dollars in product, plus their pride on the line. Howard grimaced. We're stepping up security around the container. I'll coordinate with local law enforcement. This stuff is going nowhere until it's fully seized and transported to a secure facility. Commander Rourke, who had arrived from a separate area on deck, strode up. We'll keep a Coast Guard cutter on immediate standby. If they try a water assault, we'll respond. Good, Howard said. Then he turned to Travis. I guess that solves the mystery. You've done your part again. We appreciate your help. Travis gave a curt nod, feeling relief that at least the cargo was uncovered. So what now? Howard's brows furrowed as he considered. We'll want to finalize your statement about the hijacking, and we'll likely keep you around until we're sure the Barracudas are thwarted. Once the cargo is transferred, I suspect that'll calm things down. Travis noticed the captain stepping away, presumably to check on the rest of his crew. The day was winding toward dusk. A warm breeze swept across the deck. He glanced at the bullet-riddled containers, remembering the chaos. I'm just glad we got answers. Howard nodded slowly, then gave Travis a wry smirk. The silver lining for you is that we now have a legitimate reason to close your file without making you jump through too many hoops. This might expedite your re-entry so you won't face charges for stowing away. He lowered his voice. You saved that ship's crew, plus you helped us bust a major narcotics ring. Hard for anyone to argue you're a criminal. Travis felt a weight lifting. He'd half expected a fiasco of red tape and possible prosecution. If cooperating with DHS gave him a clean slate, maybe he could finally settle back in the States without looking over his shoulder. I appreciate that. Before Howard could respond, the radio crackled again with urgent chatter. Shots fired near Gate 6. Request backup. Possibly Barracuda suspects. Alarm rippled across the deck. Officers scrambled, weapons drawn. The tension soared in an instant. Howard whipped around, barking into his handheld radio. Units converge on Gate 6. Lock down the port now. Travis tensed, scanning the perimeter. The cargo ship was moored near the far end of the docks, so Gate 6 was some distance away, but the gunfire sounded ominously close. With a throbbing shoulder, Travis wasn't in prime shape for another firefight, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that the Barracudas were making a bold play for the container. Commander Rourke keyed his own calm Coast Guard teams. Maintain position at the berth. Do not let any unauthorized boats approach. Over. Howard turned back to Travis. Stay close. We don't know how many there are. A DHS tactical unit rushed down the gangway to reinforce the outer gates. Sirens wailed in the distance. The entire port seemed to bristle with armed personnel. As the sky darkened, floodlights kicked on, bathing shipping cranes and stacked containers in harsh white glare. Travis's heart drummed faster. Another confrontation loomed. The Barracudas were desperate, and desperation often bred chaos. The radio reported more scattered gunshots near the perimeter fence. Then it went silent. The hush that followed seemed more frightening than the noise. If the Barracudas had forced their way in, the ship might become ground zero all over again. Howard motioned to a couple of DHS agents. We'll go up to the Port Authority office, get a vantage of the security feeds. Caldwell, you can come if you want. Just don't get yourself shot. We've had enough drama. Travis nodded, adrenaline coiling in his gut despite his fatigue. Lead the way. They hurried down the pier, passing lines of newly arrived police cruisers. Lights strobed blue and red across the water. When they reached the Port Authority building, a low-slung structure with large windows, they found uniformed staff scurrying inside, monitoring CCTV cameras that covered every angle of the port. A massive bank of monitors showed multiple camera feeds, gate checkpoints, cargo yards, the main approach roads. One feed showed muzzle flashes near a fence line, masked men exchanging fire with police. Another feed displayed a pair of individuals climbing a stack of containers near the west side, dangerously close to the Horizon Sun's berth. Howard pointed at that feed. They're trying to slip around the firefight, maybe heading for the berth from the opposite direction. Travis studied the grainy footage. Sure enough, two silhouettes advanced among the crates. They wore dark clothing, rifles in hand. Possibly a splinter team. Howard snapped into action. We need a tactical response to that area. If they get to the ship, we risk a direct confrontation on board. A Port Authority official radioed the location, directing units. But the feed showed that most squads were pinned at Gate 6, dealing with the more obvious threat. The approach near the west containers was underdefended. One of Howard's agents cursed. It'll take time for reinforcements to loop around. Travis felt a surge of resolve, an echo of the night on the cargo ship. I can intercept them, he said before fully thinking it through. If I go with a small team, we can cut them off. Howard gave him a sharp look. You're injured. I can still shoot. I know the terrain. These container yards can become a maze. Rourke nodded. He's right. We can't let them sneak on board. Howard hesitated, torn between liability and necessity. Then he exhaled hard. Fine. You and a couple of my agents. Keep it tight. Minimize risk. Travis didn't argue. Even battered and exhausted, he felt a sense of duty, the same drive that had compelled him to act on the Horizon Sun. Let's move, he said, adrenaline thrumming anew. They left the Port Authority building, forging a path through side corridors that led to the western container stacks. Overhead floodlights lit some corridors, but others lay in partial darkness. The roars of gunfire from Gate 6 reverberated in the background, an ominous soundtrack to the infiltration. Travis, Howard, and two DHS agents advanced cautiously, rifles raised. Howard handed Travis a spare carbine from their vehicle. The shipping containers towered around them, forming claustrophobic aisles. Nighttime gloom mingled with the stark glow of high-mounted lamps. Step by step, they wove through the labyrinth. The tension pressed thick. Any corner could conceal armed men. Travis scanned overhead platforms, mindful that hijackers might climb to gain vantage. His wounded shoulder ached, but adrenaline dulled the pain. A radio whisper crackled in Howard's earpiece. We lost visual on the suspects. They're somewhere in the western yard, possible near row D or E. Travis's gut tensed. The E-Series containers again. By now, the Barracudas must suspect the hidden cocaine was discovered. They might try to destroy it or recapture it. He recalled the group's viciousness on the ship. They wouldn't hesitate to shoot. Crouching behind a forklift, Travis signaled the group to spread out. Carefully, they rounded a corner into an aisle of E-labeled containers. The overhead lamp was busted here, leaving a pocket of darkness. In the faint glow from distant lights, Travis glimpsed movement. Two shadows flitting along the row's edge. A metallic clank. Someone accidentally kicked a loose pipe. The figures froze. Then a hissed exchange in Spanish. Calate! Shut up. Travis's heart hammered. He and the DHS agents were maybe 30 yards away. One agent raised his rifle, trying to line up a shot. Then a muzzle flash erupted from the shadows, lighting the corridor in stark relief. The agent dove for cover, bullets whining off steel walls. Howard returned fire, muzzle blasts strobing in the night. Travis ducked behind a crate, scanning for the second suspect. The hiss of footsteps told him the second was circling around, maybe trying to flank. Adrenaline surged. He pressed the carbine stock to his injured shoulder, wincing at the stab of pain. But he held firm. The second suspect emerged behind a container, silhouette barely visible. Travis squeezed the trigger once, twice. Sparks lit the container wall. The suspect lurched, dropping to one knee with a strangled cry. Meanwhile, the first suspect unleashed wild automatic fire at Howard and the other agent. Sparks showered from the forklift. Travis pivoted, firing at the muzzle flashes. One round must have caught the suspect's arm, because the gunfire abruptly ceased. A muffled curse in Spanish, then frantic scuffling. Travis advanced cautiously, edges of his vision pulsing with adrenaline. The second suspect lay prone, groaning. The first suspect was slumped against a container, clutching his arm. His rifle lay out of reach. The DHS agents rushed forward, ordering them to freeze, to not move. Hands trembling, the first suspect glared with hatred. He spat on the ground, refusing to speak. The second suspect, bleeding from the abdomen, simply moaned. Howard kept his weapon trained, radioing in. Shots fired, 2 suspects down, requesting medics. Western Container Yard, Row E. Travis exhaled shakily, stepping back. His shoulder felt on fire, warm wetness soaking through the bandage anew. But the threat was neutralized. These 2 might be part of a larger cell, or maybe just the tip of the spear. Either way, with them subdued, the cargo was safe, at least for now. The distant rattle of gunfire near Gate 6 had lessened, indicating the main firefight might also be winding down. Howard approached Travis. "You all right?" Travis nodded, though spots of black swam at the edge of his vision. "I'll live." "Good." Howard surveyed the captured suspects, then gave Travis a nod of respect. "You're a damn stubborn one." Travis said nothing, only let out a weary breath. He'd come into the country intending to stay invisible, but fate had repeatedly thrust him into the line of fire. Maybe that was the price of doing what he did best, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As medics and backup units converged on the scene, Travis sank against a crate, letting the rush of adrenaline fade. He felt the swirl of relief and dread in equal measure. The Barracudas had been thwarted again, but would they stop? Or was this just one more battle in a war that might follow him wherever he went? He had no easy answers. For the moment, all that mattered was the standoff was over, and no friendlies had died. He closed his eyes, ignoring the sting of salt sweat in his wound, letting the wave of fatigue wash over him. Blood seeped through Travis's bandage, leaving a dark stain on his shirt by the time he reached the makeshift command post at the Port Authority building. Dizzy with pain, he clutched his left arm to his side. A paramedic tried to guide him to a stretcher, but he waved them off, eyes scanning for Howard or Rourke. "Sit down before you pass out," the paramedic insisted, pressing a gauze pad to his shoulder. "We'll get you stable." Travis grudgingly sank onto a metal bench, leaning his head back against the wall. Chaos reigned outside. Sirens, shouting, the clang of container machinery, the whir of helicopter blades overhead. The firefight at Gate 6 had wound down, with local police regaining control. 2 suspects were reportedly killed, 3 wounded and in custody. The 2 Travis's team apprehended were also being rushed to a hospital under guard. He spotted Special Agent Howard crossing the room with brisk strides. Sweat glistened on Howard's brow, and his expression was taut with urgency. "How are you holding up?" Howard asked, kneeling beside Travis. Travis gave a half-smile. "Still breathing." Howard nodded. We have half a dozen Barracuda affiliates dead or captured tonight. The rest fled. It looks like they tried a dual assault. Some at the gate, others sneaking around the far side. We'll know more as we interrogate the survivors. Travis grimaced. They're persistent. That cocaine cargo must be huge for them to risk open warfare. Howard exhaled. Well, it's over for now. We'll have to keep that container under tight lockdown until we can transport it to a secure DEA facility. But I think you've more than done your share, Caldwell. A flicker of relief passed through Travis. Finally, maybe the immediate threat was contained. What about me? He asked quietly. Still stuck in custody? Before Howard could answer, Commander Rourke approached, overhearing the question. He clapped a hand on Travis's uninjured shoulder. You've saved a lot of good people again. I spoke with my superiors. We're coordinating with DHS. They're prepared to expedite your case. Howard nodded in agreement. We can arrange official re-entry documents. You'll likely still need to sign some statements and see a judge for a formality, but you won't face major charges. In fact, I suspect you'll get a commendation for helping break this ring. Travis felt tension uncoil in his chest. He'd gone from a ghost on the run to a hero they couldn't easily prosecute. I appreciate that, he murmured. Howard patted his shoulder gently. Stay put. Get patched up. Then we'll finalize the paperwork. With that, he hurried off to oversee the chaotic aftermath. Rourke lingered a moment, regarding Travis with the steady gaze of a fellow serviceman. You did a fine thing. I know it probably wasn't your plan to be in the spotlight, but sometimes we don't get to choose. Travis forced a weak chuckle. Story of my life, Commander. Rourke nodded, then left to coordinate with Coast Guard personnel. The paramedic resumed working on Travis's shoulder, applying fresh bandages with disinfectant. Travis winced, letting his eyes close, exhaustion pulling at every fiber of his being. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, drifting between pain and half-sleep. Eventually, a different medic helped him to an ambulance, where they insisted on bringing him to a local hospital for a thorough checkup. Travis was too spent to argue. He let them load him in. Late that night, Travis lay in a crisp white bed at Miami General Hospital, and 4 in his arm and a fresh set of bandages on his shoulder. The small, sterile room smelled of disinfectant. He dozed fitfully, awakened periodically by the beep of monitors or the shuffle of nurses. In the morning, sunlight streamed through a narrow window. A nurse popped in, checked his vitals, then told him he had a visitor. Travis tensed, half expecting more DHS agents. Instead, the door opened to reveal Rodriguez, the Horizon Sun's officer he'd rescued from a near execution on the ship. Rodriguez's expression lit with relief. Hey, amigo. You look better than last time I saw you. Travis managed a slight grin. Not sure about that. Feels like I got run over by a truck. Rodriguez laughed softly. Well, you're alive, which is more than can be said for those hijackers. He stepped closer, offering a small gift bag. Some of the crew chipped in for a thank you. There's fruit, snacks, and a little card. Travis blinked, touched by the gesture. That's kind of you. Appreciate it. Rodriguez settled in a chair, resting his elbows on his knees. We heard you got tangled up with the feds after that. Crazy. The captain's been trying to make sure they don't charge you with anything, but it sounds like you're in the clear now. Travis nodded. Howard and Commander Rourke said they'd handle it. Looks like it's settled. I might have to sign a few papers, but no jail time. Rodriguez exhaled relief. Good. The crew was ready to stage a protest if they tried to lock you up. They shared a warm moment of camaraderie. Then a pensive look crossed Rodriguez's face. So, what's next for you? Travis sighed, gazing out the window at the Miami skyline. Truthfully, I hadn't planned that far. I was trying to come home quietly, maybe see some family up north if I can. Didn't intend to get stuck in a firefight at sea." Rodriguez chuckled ruefully. "Life has a way of surprising us." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a slip of paper. "If you need anything, or if you want to connect with the crew once you're discharged, here's my number. We've got a local union hall where we gather sometimes." "You'd be welcome." Travis accepted it, nodding gratitude. "Thank you. I might just do that." They chatted a bit longer about the condition of the other wounded crew members. Some were still shaken, but physically stable. The shipping company was covering medical bills and therapy sessions. Rodriguez also mentioned rumors that the shipping line would face an investigation into how such a massive drug shipment ended up in their cargo unnoticed. "I guess the big suits at the company are scrambling," Rodriguez said. "But they can't blame the crew. Everyone is just relieved the Barracudas didn't blow us out of the water." Eventually, Rodriguez excused himself to let Travis rest, leaving behind the gift bag. After he departed, Travis rummaged through it. A small container of fresh fruit, a bag of chips, and a handwritten card signed by half a dozen crew members. Simple messages of thanks. He felt a rare warmth flood his chest. He'd never sought praise, but it was nice to be appreciated. He spent another day in the hospital, drifting between boredom and medical checks. On the second evening, Howard dropped by in casual attire, looking less rigid than usual. "How's the shoulder?" the agent asked. "Doc says I'll keep the arm. Just need rest and physical therapy." Howard nodded, handing Travis a manila folder. "Inside, you'll find your official reentry documents, courtesy of an expedited process. DHS has cleared you, with the condition you remain available for testimony should the Barracuda's case go to trial." Travis thumbed through the papers. They granted him a valid ID, some provisional licensing, and a note about possible follow-up interviews. It was more bureaucracy than he'd wanted, but it gave him legal footing. "That's unexpectedly generous. Thanks." Howard shrugged. "You earned it. The local DA and federal prosecutors appreciate your cooperation. Besides, you saved a lot of lives. Even bureaucrats can't ignore that." Travis met Howard's gaze. "What about the Barracudas? This was a big bust. But are they crippled or just wounded?" Howard's jaw tightened. "They're not gone. We nabbed some key players, seized a major shipment, but their network is large. We'll keep pressure on them. If we need your testimony, we'll let you know." Travis nodded slowly. Deep down, he felt a pang of concern. Groups like the Barracudas often retaliated, but perhaps the feds had enough to keep them on the run. Howard rose to leave, then paused. "Caldwell, there might be opportunities for someone with your skill set, private security companies, consulting for law enforcement. If you wanted to go legit." Travis offered a small, non-committal smile. "I'll keep it in mind. For now, I need a break." Howard gave a parting nod. "Take care of yourself. If you get in trouble, call me before you decide to handle it alone. Okay?" Travis couldn't help a faint chuckle. "Sure thing, Agent." By the following morning, the hospital discharged Travis with pain meds, a sling for his arm, and instructions to rest. A local cab took him to a budget motel near the Miami coast, courtesy of a small stipend arranged through the shipping company's insurance, an odd gesture of gratitude for saving them from worse liabilities. Inside the modest motel room, Travis set his meager belongings on the bed. The manila folder of documents, the gift bag from the crew, and a backpack with some spare clothes that Howard had provided. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt the sweet freedom of not needing to hide. He could walk outside, watch the sunset, buy a meal, all without scanning over his shoulder for suspicious watchers. Or so he hoped. Yet a subtle undercurrent of anxiety remained. The Barracudas might have eyes in the city. They'd lost a fortune in cocaine. If they discovered that Travis Caldwell was the ex-Marine who foiled their hijacking, But maybe they had bigger concerns than revenge on a single man. To calm his thoughts, he flipped on the TV. Local news ran a brief story about a major drug seizure at the port of Miami, praising law enforcement's swift action. No mention of Travis or the entire hijacking fiasco, aside from referencing that the cargo ship had been attacked by suspected cartel elements. The deeper details were likely classified or downplayed. Travis switched channels, uninterested in more hype. He sank onto the bed, letting exhaustion claim him again. The pain medication dulled the edge of his shoulder, and soon he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke in the small hours of the morning, the motel's air conditioner humming faintly. Night pressed against the windows, streetlights casting pale halos on the parking lot outside. A sudden restlessness prodded him awake. He couldn't just lie around in a motel forever. He had money saved in scattered accounts, small, unremarkable sums he kept under different aliases to avoid leaving a trace. Now that he was somewhat legit again, maybe he could transfer some funds, get a new phone, reach out to his sister in upstate New York. He hadn't spoken to her in years. The thought both comforted and unsettled him. He imagined a quiet life, maybe a normal job or going back to school on the GI Bill. But was that possible after all the violence and chaos he'd seen? His mind drifted to the shipping container he'd stowed away in, that last desperate attempt to stay invisible. Fate had forced him out of the shadows in the most dramatic way. Perhaps that was a sign. Groaning with effort, he sat up, flicked on the lamp, and rummaged for the slip of paper Rodriguez had given him. The phone number to the Union Hall. Maybe he'd call in a day or two, meet the crew again for drinks, share stories under normal circumstances instead of gunfire. He also thought about Agent Howard's suggestion, consulting work. He'd parted ways with the military to avoid certain unscrupulous private contractors, but not all work was the same. Maybe there were honorable outfits providing training or security to legitimate clients. He wasn't sure if he wanted that path, but it was an option. For now, he resolved to take it day by day. The immediate storm had passed. The Barracudas had been dealt a heavy blow, though Travis suspected the underworld was rarely so simple. Sooner or later, trouble might resurface. But at least he was no longer a ghost on the run. He gazed at the half-healed bullet grazes on his arm, remembering the scorching firefights, the terrified cries of the crew, the stench of gunpowder on the horizon sun. Nobody could say he hadn't earned his rest. Reaching over, he switched off the lamp, letting the darkness envelop him once more. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new roads. For better or worse, Travis Caldwell was finally back on American soil, and the next chapter of his life awaited. A restless week slipped by in Miami. Travis spent his days healing, slowly regaining motion in his bandaged shoulder. Each morning, he went for short walks around the block, ignoring the twinges of pain. He purchased a cheap phone with some of his newly accessible funds, though he gave the number out only to Agent Howard and a couple of the Horizon Sun crew. In quiet moments, Travis pondered his future. Even with the legal hurdles cleared, he had no permanent home, no immediate job. A handful of ideas flickered through his mind. Security consulting, heading north to see his sister, maybe disappearing again into rural anonymity. But the memory of that cargo ship ordeal lingered like a half-healed wound, reminding him that trouble had a way of finding him. One evening, he finally dialed Rodriguez's number. The officer answered with genuine warmth, urging Travis to visit the Union Hall where several crew members gathered for camaraderie. Travis hesitated, uncertain if he was ready for social encounters. But something in him yearned to see familiar faces outside the crucible of conflict. So the following night, Travis hailed a rideshare to a modest building in a working-class neighborhood near the docks. A neon sign flickered overhead, proclaiming Seafarers and Longshoremen's Hall. Inside, the smell of beer, fried food, and cheap cologne mingled. the buzz of conversation filling the air. Rodriguez spotted him at once, beckoning from a corner table. Several other crew members from the Horizon Sun sat there, sipping drinks. They greeted Travis with enthusiastic handshakes or pats on the back, gestures of gratitude that made him feel awkward but touched. Over a round of cold beers, they exchanged stories. The men and women recounted the nightmares of the hijacking, their fear overshadowed by relief that Travis had been there. They asked how his shoulder fared, teased him about becoming a legend among the local maritime circles. One older deckhand, Garcia, raised a toast to Travis Caldwell, the stowaway who saved our sorry hides. They clinked glasses and Travis cleared his throat. I appreciate it, but you all fought bravely too. I just did what I was trained to do. A ripple of good-natured laughs. Rodriguez pointed at him with mock seriousness. Admit it, you're secretly Superman, no? Travis chuckled softly, feeling a hint of warmth in his cheeks. This camaraderie was reminiscent of old Marine days. A band of people bound by shared peril. As the night wore on, more union workers trickled in, filling the smoky air with chatter and raucous laughter. The tension of the hijacking felt distant in this cozy bubble, but Travis knew it was never truly gone. Later, out on the sidewalk for some fresh air, he leaned against a lamppost with Rodriguez. The rest of the crew were inside, singing rowdy shanties off-key. Rodriguez eyed Travis. You look like you got something on your mind. Travis sighed. Just thinking about next steps. My old life's complicated. I have some family up north, but we're not close. And it's been years since I lived a normal civilian routine. Don't know if I can just flip a switch. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. I get it. After what we went through, it's hard to settle. But maybe that's what you need. A chance to breathe, find purpose in something peaceful. Travis stared out at the dim street, a few stray cars rattling by. Yeah, maybe. Rodriguez grinned. Or if peace bores you, sign on as security for cargo ships. They'd pay top dollar for a guard who can actually handle pirates. Travis let out a short laugh. Pirates off Florida? This isn't the Gulf of Aden. Rodriguez shrugged. These days, maritime crime pops up anywhere, especially with cartels around. There's a reason private security is a booming business. Could be less intense than your Force Recon days, but enough to keep you sharp. Something about the idea tugged at Travis. He'd be on familiar territory, still on the seas, but hopefully not in the thick of lethal firefights every day. I'll keep that in mind, he said honestly. They lingered a while, then rejoined the others for another hour of mingled conversation and music. Eventually, Travis excused himself, bidding them good night. He left with a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few days, life settled into a tentative normalcy. Travis moved from the cheap motel into a short-term rental apartment near the water, using funds from his old accounts plus a small recompense from the shipping company's insurance. He found a decent physical therapist who guided him through gentle exercises to rebuild shoulder strength. The Florida sun and mild breezes made morning walks more bearable. Yet, the specter of the barracudas lurked in his peripheral awareness. Occasionally, news headlines mentioned scattered arrests or seizures linked to the cartel. He wondered if they might target him for revenge. Agent Howard had assured him the feds were vigilant, but that was small comfort if a determined hit squad came calling. One afternoon, as he finished a PT session, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A familiar baritone voice filled his ear. Caldwell. It's Howard. Travis tensed. Something happen? Sort of. We've interrogated the captured barracudas. They're tight-lipped, but we gleaned hints of an internal power struggle. With Santos gone, some want a truce, others want revenge. Just watch your back. Travis exhaled. That's not reassuring. Howard paused. Look, we can't keep you in protective custody forever. But if you see anything suspicious, call me. The good news is, there's a bigger crackdown on their network statewide. We've made progress. Thanks for the heads up, Travis said. Howard hesitated again, as if weighing his words. Listen, some of my colleagues are impressed with how you handled yourself. If you're interested in legitimate security or consulting work, I can put in a recommendation. The pay's not bad, and it'd give you a chance to use your skills legally. Travis considered. I appreciate it, but I'm still deciding. Might take a break from guns and violence. Howard's voice softened. Understood. You've earned that break. But the offer's open. Stay safe. They ended the call. Travis stared at the phone, conflicting emotions swirling. The sense of always being on alert warred with the desire to carve out a tranquil niche for himself. Maybe it was possible to live a quiet life, but was that truly in his nature? A week later, near twilight, Travis ventured down to the water's edge. A small boardwalk overlooked the bay. Fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, seagulls crying overhead. The horizon glowed with the orange and pink aftermath of a tropical sunset. He leaned on the railing, letting the ocean breeze wash over him. The hush of lapping waves soothed some deep ache inside. Memories of the horizon sun flickered, gunfire, the stink of diesel and cordite, the panicked eyes of the crew. Hard to believe it had happened mere weeks ago. He closed his eyes, inhaling the salt air. The idea of returning to the sea as a security contractor flitted through his mind. He pictured guiding shipping crews, ensuring safe passage, preventing more tragedies like the hijacking. Perhaps he could do good without being embroiled in constant clandestine battles. A soft rustle behind him. Travis's instincts prickled. He turned slightly, scanning the walkway. A lone figure had drifted closer. Hooded sweatshirt, hands in pockets, face partially in shadow. The man paused as Travis glanced over, then resumed walking, slipping past with a casual nod. Travis exhaled, forcing himself to relax. He was probably overreacting. Not everyone was a threat, yet the uneasy coil in his stomach remained. It would take time to shed that reflex. That same evening, after returning to his apartment, Travis decided to call his sister. They'd been mostly estranged since he left the Marines. She lived somewhere in upstate New York, teaching at a small community college. He'd stored her number in a notebook years ago. Digging it out, he punched in the digits, heart pounding. It rang several times before a wary female voice answered. Hello. Travis's voice caught in his throat. Hey, Allie. It's Travis. A hush. Then, disbelieving. Oh my God. Travis? Where are you? Are you okay? Hearing her concern tugged at something deep in him. I'm in Florida. Long story. I'm safe, though. Allie's voice quivered with relief and a hint of anger. You dropped off the map for so long. I wasn't sure if you were even alive. I tried reaching out to the last address I had, but everything bounced. Guilt churned in his gut. I know. I'm sorry. I had reasons for going dark. He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I got tangled in some rough stuff overseas. Wanted to keep distance so no trouble followed me back. Allie sighed softly. I wish you'd told me something. But okay, you're safe now. That's what matters. A wave of emotion welled up. He'd missed her more than he realized. How have you been? How's everything? She gave him a swift rundown. She'd settled into a stable teaching job, had a decent apartment. She'd worried about him constantly. Life had moved on, but she always hoped he'd reach out. Her words carried a mix of love and exasperation. An older sister who'd never stopped caring. Finally, Allie said, If you want to come up here, you know you're welcome. There's a guest room, it's quiet. You can get your head together. No pressure, but I'd love to see you. Travis closed his eyes, a tide of longing for simpler times washing over him. I might do that soon. Need to tie up some loose ends here first. Okay, she said gently. Just promise you won't vanish again without saying goodbye. He swallowed. I promise. They said their farewells, exchanging contact details. After he hung up, Travis sat in silence, grappling with the swirl of emotions. Regret, hope, relief. Maybe a trip north would be the best thing for him, at least for a while. Let the heat of Florida fade along with memories of gunfights. Just when he thought fate might let him rest, trouble knocked again. It came 2 days later, in the form of a cryptic message on his phone from Rodriguez. We've got a problem. Call me ASAP. Travis dialed immediately, tension knotting his shoulders. Rodriguez answered in a low, urgent voice. Travis, sorry to bother you, but something weird is going on at the Union. A couple of guys said they saw suspicious strangers asking about you last night. They claimed to be friends, but no one recognized them. Travis's heart kicked. You think they're barracudas? Rodriguez exhaled. Could be. Or some affiliates. They were snooping around, showing your photo. That means they know your face, your name. A chill slithered down Travis's spine. He'd assumed the cartel was too busy licking its wounds. But apparently some branch was still hunting. Thanks for the warning. Rodriguez's voice held concern. Maybe you should lay low or leave town for a while. These guys didn't seem like they were just curious. They had an edge about them. Travis nodded grimly, then realized Rodriguez couldn't see him. Understood. I'll figure something out. Keep your head down, too. All right? Will do, Rodriguez said. Call if you need backup. They hung up. Travis set the phone aside, pulse hammering. So the barracudas or some element of them wanted revenge or to tie up loose ends. He stared at the dusty duffel bag in the corner that held the few clothes and supplies he owned. Maybe it was time to pack up and move on, especially since he'd been planning to see Allie anyway. Yet something in him bristled at the notion of fleeing. He'd worked hard to secure legal standing, forging tenuous connections with new friends. Why should he be driven out by criminals? But then again, why risk the safety of those around him? As he paced the apartment, the phone rang again. This time, the ID showed Agent Howard. Travis snatched it up. I just heard I might have unwelcome visitors. Howard's tone was clipped. You do. We got intel that a breakaway faction of the Barracudas is hunting down anyone connected to the lost shipment. Several associates of Santos's old clique are in town. Rumor says they want blood. I strongly suggest you relocate or accept protective detail. Travis's jaw clenched. Not a fan of hiding under federal guard. Howard snorted. Then at least leave Miami. Make it harder for them to find you. We can't station an agent on your doorstep indefinitely. Travis glanced around the Spartan apartment. He'd grown comfortable here, but comfort was a luxury. All right, he said quietly. I'll go. I was planning to head north anyway. Smart move, Howard said. Keep me posted on your location, just in case. And if you see anything suspicious, call 911 first, then me. Travis hung up, a swirl of resignation and anger roiling in his gut. This was the price of tangling with a ruthless cartel. He'd drawn their wrath. Unless he stuck around with a small army to guard him, the prudent choice was to vanish. With grim efficiency, he packed his belongings, slipping the necessary documents into a secure pouch. He strapped on the sling for his shoulder, though it had improved enough that he seldom needed it. He did, however, keep a small pistol at hand. Howard had returned his confiscated sidearm once they cleared him, though it was now properly registered. He didn't intend to use it unless forced, but he'd learned not to travel unarmed. By sunset, he'd settled his motel tab, arranged a one-way car rental, and loaded up. Before departing, He made one last call to Rodriguez, explaining he'd leave town for a bit. Rodriguez understood, telling him to stay safe and keep in touch. Outside, the sky glowed purple with streaks of orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Travis slid into the driver's seat of a modest sedan, keying the ignition. The engine purred to life. He took a final glance in the rearview mirror, scanning for any watchers. The parking lot was empty except for a stray cat nosing around a dumpster. He pulled out onto the street, merging into light traffic. A hush settled over him, a mixture of relief and regret. Florida had become both a battleground and a brief refuge. Now he was leaving it behind, hoping the barracudas wouldn't track him up the East Coast. As he hit the highway, city lights receding in the rearview, he felt a faint stirring of anticipation. He'd see his sister after all these years, maybe find some measure of peace. With a little luck, the barracudas would lose his trail, focusing on bigger fish. And if not, well, Travis Caldwell had never shied from a fight, even when it cost him dearly. He pressed the gas, letting the Florida night slip past in a blur of street lamps. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he had a destination, and maybe even a chance to start fresh. If new storms lay ahead, he'd face them the same way he always had. Head-on, determined, and unbroken. He drove onward, into the wide dark horizon, ready to write the next chapter of his life. One free from shadows, or as close to free as a warrior's soul could ever be.